means us.
Yeah.
We're going to have a bluegrass band playing 80s pop songs. Because Ross loves bluegrass, but I love 80s music.
And then at the end of the ceremony, this is great. We're going to pass out sparklers to all the guests.
Sources claim that a bunch of candles in mason jars and an Instagram photo booth will truly capture the essence of the insufferable pair.
We didn't want some big, stuffy ceremony.
Yeah,
It should feel more like a fun dance party with our friends.
Because the night's about us, yes, but I mean, it's also, about the people who make us us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And those people love us exactly for our uniqueness.
Sources hoped with every fiber of their being that these two would be divorced within a year.
This is the Onion News Network.
Got Telegram? You can follow our channel there and discuss show prep with other listeners at telegram.freetalklive.com. Free Talk Live.
It's Free Talk Live. That's talk radio that you control. That means that you can call 603-283-6160. That's 603-283-6160. And with you in the studio tonight, you've got me, Bonnie.
And Peakless Mountaineer.
And we have quite a few things to cover tonight, including something that's very near and dear to libertarians everywhere's hearts. The Chevron deference or decision. I've seen it called different things, but the Chevron deference seems the most correct, has been overturned by the Supreme Court of the United States. And we're going to talk tonight about what that exactly means. It is Chevron, like the oil company or gas company. I don't know really exactly what you would call them. And it's a 1984 decision or deference that a court made in a court case called Chevron versus Natural Resources Defense Council. Basically, this thing has been it's been enabling to the giant behemoth of unelected bureaucrats controlling your daily life that has been going on for 40 years now. It is such a bad thing, and there has been whispering for 2 years at least, where I remember the first time I ever heard of this thing was 2 years ago when Matt Roach was talking about how he heard that there's whispering that the Supreme Court might overturn the Chevron decision. He told us what that meant, and me and Ian were like, wow, that sounds really good for Ian. There are certain reasons why it might not be good for Ian Freeman, my husband who's in prison, that we could get into. But at the very least, it's good for the future of the United States. So what do you think about what you're hearing so far?
Well,
Mountaineer.
It just reminds me of, so one of there's sort of two overlapping but distinct definitions of deep state, right? And the one that I think we can all agree is definitely a thing, it's really obvious, it's very well documented, is that level of, okay, whether or not this is, some conspiracy or whatever, whether or not they're directed by, whoever, we know for a fact that there is this class of bureaucrats that never goes anywhere, where the vast majority of our government is made up of people who do not shift in and out when we, allegedly change the system and overthrow the leadership. It's this same class of people who do in fact have a culture of their own, of government, and that they have basically all of the power at this point. And this is one of the big reasons why, is because this decision said, oh, well, you get to determine what the rules are, bureaucracy.
Yep.
We, the judges, the judicial, the third branch, whose job it is to, oh, well, there's a conflict between this branch and that branch. Oh, there's a conflict between this branch of government and this person. Mm-hmm. And they went, nah, we'll just hand this over completely to the bureaucracy. If you decided that this was the law, we won't, figure out whether it's constitutional or not. We will just say, yup, them's the rules. Whatever they say, those are the rules. And I mean, one of the things that recently came up with this is where you have like the SEC chair making completely nonsensical decisions.
Yep.
Because the judges have not been pushing back at all in any way, shape, or form under any circumstances on the bureaucratic state.
And a lot of people like to say, well, these are the experts of these fields. So that head of the SEC is the expert on all things that the SEC should know about. But these people, I think they mostly just get into power because they claw their way up to the top. And it's not that they have the best... and lots of people are using the term good faith. It's not like they have these good faith intentions for the field they're working in. They're working for some small group of people inside of that group to make them make the most money. It's so obvious, and it really shouldn't matter even if they were just like all the most moral people you could find in the world, if it's unconstitutional the way that things are going down. Like, for example, what this thing says is that if something is ambiguous in the federal statutes about something involving the SEC, that the judge will just defer to the SEC's definition of whatever that is and makes it less ambiguous if it's deemed to be reasonable, which is completely subjective.
Yeah, deemed to be reasonable. That what a very strict and specific thing.
Yeah.
Which is why you have, like, for example, the SEC, who will suddenly say, oh, well, I approved the futures market, but I can't approve a spot market because it might be manipulated. When that obviously makes no sense, because if anything, it will be harder to manipulate a market that doesn't require you to actually own the thing that it's supposed to be pricing.
Sounds unreasonable.
Right. And they're so accustomed to having no pushback under any circumstances, no matter how many times people sue them from the judicial, branch of the government, that they do all of these nonsensical things. And it's just naked abuse of power. And I mean, if anyone out there considers, what we usually use the term politics for in our ordinary life, not necessarily literal politics, but like political BS, when in your company or corporate structure or what have you, when you have someone who's, inauthentic and hypocritical and, playing one side against the other in order to claw their way up in this, really unscrupulous way, that kind of politics is absolutely how these people get into their positions. The people who are willing to do the most evil and vile things that they can get away with in order to get into higher positions of power, and then want to express that power largely through nonsense. Because if I can get away with something that is on the face of it not okay, then I get that dopamine hit, that heroin-like piece of, ooh, I have that power.
And we know that power corrupts, and it's just proven every single little time when somebody gets the littlest bit of power that you wouldn't even think somebody would care about. Somebody out there cares about it, wants it, and lets it corrupt them. It's so crazy. Absolutely right.
And to see this returned is just absolutely mind-blowing to me. I mean, a blow to the entrenched interests is just such a rare thing to actually see in this world.
I know that the three Supreme Court justices that said no were Kagan, Sotomayor, and is her name Ketanji Jenkins? Ketanji something else. The three left-wing women. It just seems so obvious that they're wrong that I just can't imagine why they're even there. But
well, I mean, basically because they are leftist authoritarians. And that's really all it comes down to, is they absolutely want as much autonomy for the bureaucracy as possible. And a big part of this has to do with the fact that those are their friends. Mm-hmm. I mean, the tendency is that in a bureaucracy, you will get more and more people in more and more positions of power that want to empower the bureaucracy. So you have this especially authoritarian and like left of center sort of general push within these bureaucracies. So, like, unless you have someone with a specifically, well, fascist perspective who goes, oh, well, no, I want to make sure that the corporations have their chunk of authoritarian power, then you have this push to the left. Because all of these are authoritarian structures. So, of course, they're going to be like, no, you can't take power away from our communism.
Yeah. I felt like me and you were going to have an obviously libertarian perspective on this, and we'd be able to talk about that forever. So what I did was I Googled, what does the Supreme Court ending Chevron mean, and looked for, well, actually, like the first one that came up was just very left-leaning, and them talking about why this is so bad, so we can get another perspective on the show and talk about how ridiculous it is, because it just really, there's just no defending this thing.
Well, and I expect that there are going to be a lot of articles that come out now about, oh, no, this is really undermining all of our expertise.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. People are always saying, like, shouldn't we be trusting the experts and not the Supreme Court? That's just not how the Constitution was laid out. And just because you're calling something an expert or someone an expert doesn't mean that they have some kind of, completely pure intentions and they are actually doing what's best for people. I'm not saying that's the case with the courts either, but at least you can interface with those people as opposed to just some unelected bureaucrat you'll never know the name of, right, that you definitely have no power to come up against.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's two things in particular. So one, we are generally accustomed to dealing with experts in particular fields because we're in something that is similar to a market. There are market forces that eliminate people who are incompetent to at least some level in their job, because that's most of our world. But in government, that's not how this works at all. You do not get eliminated because of your incompetence. If anything, your incompetence gets very easily papered over to the point of saying, oh, well, we're not getting enough of this job done. We must need more money over here. So there's that side of it. And there's the other side of it where, for better or for worse, and well, exclusively for worse, people tend to look at the state as if it has this halo around it, as if government by its nature is good.
Sounds kind of religious.
It's absolutely religious. I mean, we're told this is the will of the people, as if that was a thing. So here's this, spook, this ghost, this phantasm, this spirit of the people and the people's will. And this embodies the will of the people, as if A, that were possible, and B, as if this way of doing things led to that outcome, where you can look at a statistical analysis of what people want and what actually happens, shows very clearly that, about a 30% chance of any given thing getting through that is completely disconnected, whether it is universally opposed or universally in favor, about 30%.
Wow. If that was the case, if it was just, whatever the people want is what the government goes ahead with, then marijuana would not be illegal in basically any state. It definitely would have been for this many years. Tons of laws like that are just so obvious that nobody wants and no one asks for, and yet they stay, year after year. And I think that it's even worse with things that are regulatory, definitions, because that's just never ever gonna have a chance to change. It's so usually so technical that the average person has no reason to run into it until it affects their life, for one thing. And the other thing about it is that they barely will understand most of it. Like, if I started describing all of the stuff where the Chevron doctrine was actually brought up in Ian's case, the average person who wasn't following Ian's case or isn't affected by my life and Ian's lives, it either would just like not mean anything to them, or it'd be really difficult to find people who all would completely understand what I'm talking about. And even then, if they understood what I'm talking about, a lot of them wouldn't care. They're just like, I don't care, get that guy, because, well, the jury said so. It's just basically the same thing as a jury, honestly. I would rather have somebody who is a judge determining things than a jury. And it's the same thing that I'd rather have a judge determining things than just these random people who obviously their pockets are lined with the money of that agency, and they have a reason for wanting things to go the way that they're going to decide that it should go.
Yeah. And so I'm guessing that a lot of the articles that are going to come out are going to be centered around this idea of expertise.
Mm-hmm.
But like, okay, well, let's just take that argument for a moment. The judges are supposed to be the experts in law and the application of law. So, I mean, for example, this bureaucrat, they know their particular job and they know their particular area, but there are all sorts of things where this area of law over here actually impacts how you're supposed to do this area of law over here. So this bureaucrat doesn't know what that bureaucrat's doing, but the judge is in theory supposed to know about have a general idea of the laws governing all of the things so that you can see, this was determined over here, and that means that this has to change over here. So even from their perspective, where they have this halo around the government and this belief that in the total absence of market forces, you still end up with competence, okay, well, then shouldn't judges be the most competent at determining how to carry out the law?
I think that this makes them so much less competent because, like in Ian's case, the judge just deferred to what one of the federal regulatory agencies had said about a definition, when it's just like, if he didn't know what the substantive stuff is we're talking about in the case, he could have had an expert talk to him and then figured it out easily, because it was just so obvious. It was one definition, like, is Bitcoin funds? And I mean, there are just such obvious things in place where it's like, first of all, there were different definitions in different regulatory agencies. And the other thing about it is, we're just talking about that's the first court that Ian went up against in his trial. And it's not really cool that you might sometimes have to lose in a lower court and wait years for your appeal, but at least like you can have the next one look at it who's supposed to be better. I mean, it's so crappy and still so much better than just somebody in the SEC said Bitcoin is funds, and the word funds was written in 2001 and Bitcoin was invented in 2009.
Right.
It's just ridiculous. Well, here is one thing I found, that this guy has a pretty good little overview of what this means. And he is a senator for Alaska, so he has some little clips where he talks about how this will affect Alaska specifically positively, and how regulatory agencies have been messing with Alaska negatively recently, and how it wouldn't go that way without Chevron. So this guy says, his name is Dan Sullivan, a Republican from Alaska. He released the following statement after the Supreme Court overruled the landmark 1984 Chevron versus Natural Resources Defense Council decision. The ruling overturns the often cited Chevron doctrine, which directed courts to defer to federal agencies when their interpretations of ambiguous federal statutes are deemed reasonable. So he said, the Supreme Court's ruling today overturning Chevron versus NRDC is welcome news for Alaska and all Americans. Although a seemingly arcane issue about legal process, the challenges associated with Chevron deference is a topic I've been passionate about, dating back decades to my time as a judicial law clerk on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit in Fairbanks. That's where I was born. And on the Alaska Supreme Court in Anchorage, as well as during my tenure as Alaska's Attorney General and Commissioner. For decades, federal agencies in Alaska have ignored and abused federal laws relating to our state. I've witnessed firsthand federal agencies' gross abuse of Chevron deference and its devastating consequences for Alaskans and our economy. One only need to look at the recent Sturgeon line of U.S. Supreme Court cases, and that was I didn't find exactly what that did to Alaska, but it hurt their economy. And Kagan was the one writing the what's it called when she's the majority decision, I guess, writing the majority decisions. She's a bad guy who was against overruling Chevron. So the recent Sturgeon line of U.S. Supreme Court cases and today's lawless Ambler Road decision by the Biden administration's Department of Interior. Too often, federal judges in Alaska and on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit have simply cited Chevron to rubber stamp such federal agency abuse, all of which undermines our citizens' rights and our state's future. Today's Supreme Court ruling begins the long overdue need to ensure the federal courts do not continue to provide such deference to federal agencies that abuse or ignore the law. Over time, the great state of Alaska should benefit significantly from this ruling. And I was just looking up something that would describe what it is. I feel like that pretty much can make it understandable to the average person. Basically, the courts are just saying, well, you know, whatever the agencies say, whatever the unelected bureaucrats say, and it can continue to pass things that are bad for certain states, and it's just crazy. Everything that affects more than one state is supposed to be able to be taken up to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, that's a really big part about this is, okay, what if they're wrong? What if they are incorrect in their interpretation and it damages you? Well, there's nothing you can do. There's absolutely nothing you can do because the judge is just going to defer to the agency, and the agency has interpreted it this way. So you can't, even if you manage to, get an appeal and say, hey, this judge did the wrong thing, the next judge is just going to say, oh, well, actually, we're legally required to do that.
Yeah, defer. We're legally required to keep deferring and not use our own brains.
Yeah, and it just puts things in the absolute worst scenario because there is at least a tiny chance that if a judge does the wrong thing enough, they can lose their position as judge. It is possible. Whereas the bureaucrat can do the wrong thing forever, and there is nothing you can do to get them out of that position under any circumstance. So, I mean, it just puts all of the power in the worst possible place because the judge who's doing this, and this is a big part of why they're like, oh, sweet, get out of work free card. I can be lazy and not liable. Because if they interpreted it badly, then, they could have an opponent that points out, hey, here's what this judge is doing with this power. You should hand that power to me instead. Whereas, in this case, you're handing it to the bureaucrat who is not liable for their decisions, who is more likely to get off on some power, and crucially, wants to increase the power of their particular bureaucracy. Whereas the judge, it doesn't really increase their power that much, whereas it does increase their liability if they do the wrong thing there.
And this creates a whole group of people that can now go into the ear of judges and bribe them. A whole group of people called these federal regulatory creatures, swamp creatures, basically, that can go into the ear of judges and say, we want you to go this way. But now that they just don't have that power anymore, so that's just one less thing that you have to worry about. 603-283-6160 is the phone number here. You can call in with whatever is on your mind because it's Free Talk Live. More coming up. Don't go anywhere. It's Free Talk Live.
Thank you, Jode. I appreciate you taking up this issue.
First off, a man ain't cooked crisp on the Hellfire Desert, and he ought to be left on his own.
Well, right, Jode. Immigrants are desperate for a better way of life.
We need the strongest of these crude backward browns to keep us all alive. I see the ones that can swim the Rio Grande, too. Berto, you swum that border river to get here, ain't you?
Jode, not all Mexicans came here by swimming the Rio Grande.
No. I got sympathy. I crossed Huron Lake in the barrel myself using hands as paddles. Lived off the carp. What jumped at me? Now, you swum that river, ain't you?
No, Jode, actually, I was born here.
What you know about hard work? Ain't never swum no river.
Many immigrants,
I say you ain't never know the man till you seen his teeth. Show him your teeth. Too many teeth rotting out shows you're dishonest in the mind. You got strong, manful teeth, Barto. I apologize.
This is the Onion News Network.
From Feature Story News in New York, I'm Sally Patterson with a look back at some of the week's top stories.
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
US President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump went head-to-head in a fiery presidential debate, televised on Thursday. Hosted in the US city of Atlanta by CNN, this was the first debate of the year between the two presumptive nominees, who are vying to return to the White House in November's election. The pair clashed over immigration, foreign policy and abortion, though the age of both candidates was also in the spotlight.
I spent half my career being criticized being the youngest person in politics. I was the second youngest person ever elected to the United States Senate, and now I'm the oldest. This guy's 3 years younger and a lot less competent. I think that just look at the record. Look at what I've done. Look how I've turned around the horrible situation he left me.
Well, I took 2 tests, cognitive tests. I aced them. We made it public. He took none. I'd like to see him take one, just one, a real easy one. Like go through the first 5 questions. He couldn't do it.
There was no audience and microphones were muted when it wasn't the candidate's time to speak. Both Democrats and Republicans are acknowledging it was a troublesome debate for the current president, who spoke with a hoarse voice and often stumbled. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange landed back in his native Australia this week after striking a plea deal with US prosecutors. His wife Stella told media he needed time to recover and to get used to freedom after a 14-year legal battle with US officials who accused him of leaking classified documents. Chris Gilbert reports.
After spending 1,900 days in Belmarsh prison in the UK and years in exile in London's Ecuadorian embassy, a US judge has ruled that his time already served fulfills a sentence for breaking the Espionage Act for leaking sensitive US government documents. Assange pled guilty, conceding he did violate the Espionage Act, but maintains the law is contradictory to the First Amendment, which he claims he should be protected under as a journalist.
Mark Rutte will be the next leader of the North Atlantic Council, or NATO, the security alliance announced this week. A major task for the former Dutch Prime Minister will be orchestrating NATO's ongoing response to the war in Ukraine. William Denzelo reports from Brussels, where the council is headquartered.
NATO's current Secretary-General says the organisation is in good hands. Rutte served as Dutch Prime Minister 4 times, spanning nearly 14 years. Providing ongoing support for Ukraine will be a top priority when Rutte takes over the post in October. Analysts say the job could be complicated further if Donald Trump wins the US presidency in November. Trump has disparaged the alliance, accusing fellow members of not pulling their weight.
That's your roundup of news making headlines this week. Sally Patterson reporting.
Our Matrix server is about as free as internet chat can be. Join the existing rooms or create your own at chat.freetalklive.com.
This is Free Talk Live. That means that you can call 603-283-6160. That's 603-283-6160. And bring up whatever is on your mind because it's Free Talk Live. And Free Talk Live is brought to you by Dash, Digital Cash. Dash is the cryptocurrency made for spending. Dash transactions are irreversible, so Dash is great for merchants. Plus, its network is protected from 51% attacks by its Chainlocks technology. Thanks to the Dash DAO for sending us 32 Dash per month for this sponsorship. It's easy to get and use Dash. You can learn more at dash.org. That's dash.org. And with you on Free Talk Live tonight, you've got me, Bonnie,
Riley,
and Bigless Mountaineer.
And in the last segment, we were talking about the Chevron deference. See, I'm seeing it called 3 different things, all with a D. The Chevron decision, the Chevron deference, and the Chevron... I don't remember the other one. Yeah, there's a third one, though. I saw it in the last thing we were reading.
Deferral?
No, I can't remember. It's decision deference.
I don't remember the third
Doctrine.
word either. Oh, okay.
So it's getting
Doctrine,
called all
huh?
three things. But
Wow. They can't make up their minds on what it is. Is it doctrine or deference? Or...
I think deference makes the most sense because
Okay.
basically they're saying like, well, you defer to whenever something's ambiguous, we defer to the regulatory agency that has a definition. So I think deference makes most sense.
Yeah, well, I'd say it's the end of the Chevron deference.
Yeah, so the Supreme Court has now ended it, just so everyone knows. We're not talking about how great the Chevron deference is. We're talking about how great it is that it has been ended.
Because useless bureaucrats cannot make decisions that need to be left to someone else.
Yep, unanswerable to bureaucrats are basically the worst kind of tyrants. That's just what it seems to be. It seems like, it's a little weird because this is a situation where, I don't know, is this anti-decentralization, would you say?
Oh, no, I'd say this is definitely a decentralization move.
Why is that?
Well, so basically the entire bureaucratic state is a single culture. And they have, as a culture, certain expectations, certain assumptions, certain beliefs, and certain goals. And that is basically a single monolith of a people that have all of this power and zero accountability. And that's a really big part of this, is that there is absolutely no way of getting at these people.
Right. And when you give people absolute power, like bureaucrats, what ends up happening is it corrupts them to the point where they think that their position of power should always exist, and we need to expand our powers and give us more authority to do more things.
Mm-hmm.
And inevitably, it leads to tyranny.
That's true. They are sucking up power.
It's absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, you can't get rid of these people by voting in a new Congress, a new Senate. You can't get rid of them by getting new judges. You can't vote in a new president and get rid of these people. There's no way that you can get rid of these people. And as everyone knows, once you've got a government job, that is a sure thing. And, you know, a lot of people will accept a lower pay to do the same work as something that's done in the private sector for a government job because they know that it is a sure thing that is going to get them a retirement. So every single one of them has every motivation to interpret anything in a way that will expand the power of the state. Whereas, I mean, it's not a great way of backstopping it, but at least there is some pushback at the fact that if a judge does this over and over and over and over again, it might be possible to get rid of them. It might be possible to point out to enough people that are voting for that, oh, hey, this particular judge is extremely corrupt and needs to be replaced. Whereas with the bureaucrat, that's just not a possibility. And it's this amazing little circle where the judge, well, I'm not at fault. It was our bureaucracy. That's how they interpreted this term. I have to follow the Chevron deferment.
So they get to pass the blame on to somebody else rather than take responsibility.
Right. While the bureaucrat gets to say, well, if I interpreted it wrong, then it is up to our justice system to set that right. I'm just doing my best.
So one thing about this thing that we haven't really got into is why did the idea of overturning it even get to the Supreme Court's desk? Well, there was this newer thing, and I don't know what year this went in because this article doesn't specifically say, but more recently, Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raymondo was a court case going on. The thing is, like, I don't see what year that was or exactly who those people were, other than I know it has to do with some fishermen, and I don't know that they're the Loper Bright side or the Raymondo side, but they took it to the Supreme Court saying, okay, the Chevron decision was used in our case. We don't think that it's right or fair, so we are now questioning the Chevron decision, and then that got all the way to the Supreme Court. So basically it says, and this is from nrdc.org, and this guy definitely has kind of a, I don't know if you'd say leftist, but definitely pro-government view on this, and he believes that it's a bad thing, that the Supreme Court has ended the Chevron deference. So the article is, the Supreme Court ends Chevron deference. What now? The Supreme Court's ruling today in Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raymondo dealt a severe blow to the ability of federal agencies to do their jobs by ending the 40-year-old precedent of Chevron deference. And I just always hate when I hear something acting like there's some kind of morality in doing your job, or it's just my job. It's just so ridiculous. It's like
right?
Something was written out in a way for you to do a certain thing doesn't make it moral or better.
It astonishes me that in a country where, I mean, let's face it, the reason that the American empire is allowed to exist is because of the Nazis. We are the thing that is against the Nazis. And that is what makes it okay for America to be the world's policeman. Is because we're not Nazis.
We're not Nazis. We get to be the policemen.
Exactly. And yet, somehow, the Nuremberg defense that all of the Nazis used, that became famous through that trial of, I was following orders, I was doing my job, did not sink into the people's hearts as this is unacceptable behavior.
Right. That's so true. And I really hate it.
Yeah. But I mean, it's just another example of avoiding accountability and responsibility. Because if you just say, well, it's policy, then you get to pretend that you are not the sort of a being that gets to make decisions about your own actions. And you just get to put the blame on, oh, well, it's the policy, it's my job, it's this.
If it's your job, you have a boss that told you to do it.
I was just following orders. And it just goes all the way up the chain of command. And wouldn't you know it, no one ever actually ends up responsible for anything.
Yeah, and this is the exact type of...
And the people at the top are never accountable to anybody. They're just accountable to some invisible being or some god or something in order to keep the people quiet.
Oh, my favorite is in most things at this point, since we have this nice little fascist system made up of corporations, is, oh, well, it goes all the way up the chain to the board and the CEOs. And, well, what's their excuse? Oh, well, I was just looking out for our stockholders.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just looking out for the stockholders. I was
looking out
serving
for our
them.
customers.
Yes, well, I was serving the stockholders.
Yeah.
Oh, well, do I get to find out who those people are? No, I don't get to find out who those people are or how many of them there are, let alone say, hey, stockholders, he's saying you're responsible for these actions. Can we blame you for this? Oh, no, it's this nice nebulous thing where we get to blame a group of people with no actual individuals in it. What a miracle that is. In the exact same way as, oh, well, I was just following the will of the people. I was just obeying my voting constituency.
It just sounds like the same thing as, I was just following orders.
Right? Only at the very top, it just disperses all over again. So instead of it being somebody's fault that anything happens ever, there's always someone else to point blame to. And at the very top where you'd think you'd finally have someone who gets to be responsible for a decision, no, they get to point it in the most directions possible. Like, oh, the president? Oh, well, he was just obeying the will of the people. So he gets to blame 330 million people for everything he does.
And this getting rid of the Chevron deference definitely feels like cutting off one little angle for them to use in that exact kind of argument that, oh, well, it's not our fault. It's an ambiguous, nebulous, like you said, group of people that you can't really put one person to blame, and you definitely can't like take them to court and change things. Well, it's just one less a route they can take to do that kind of thing. But this guy doesn't think it's a good idea because it's a severe blow to the ability of federal agencies to do their jobs. So instead of deferring to the expertise of agencies on how to interpret ambiguous language in laws pertaining to their work, federal judges now have the power to decide what a law means for themselves. It's just kind of funny because that's what being a judge means.
Yeah, who decided that the paper pushers were the interpreters of law? That's not how this is supposed to work.
No, it's not.
Where
the
did they even
Supreme
come
Court
from?
should be the interpreters.
Right, like the Supreme Court should be the interpreters, the judges should be the interpreters, the representatives in theory are supposed to be some kind of interpreter of law.
They should not be putting out ambiguous law.
That's true as well. None of this should be ambiguous, and wouldn't it be nice if they had, some culpability for when they pass really obviously bad laws? Like, you'd think that maybe something would happen to the politicians who, champion a bill that gets struck down by the Supreme Court as unconstitutional. Because, that doesn't happen very often anyway. And it'd be nice if at least the person who made a big thing out of passing this law that was so flagrantly in violation of the Constitution that even our corrupt courts had to strike it down. But, that would be accountability in politics, and they really hate that stuff.
Of course they do. It shines a light on the dark things they're doing.
They all work together, so it's almost like it's just shocking that some of the good decisions the Supreme Court has been making. But it is a call and talk radio show, and we have someone on the line, so I'm going to go to the unscreened caller on the line. You're on Free Talk Live. What's on your mind?
It's your boy, the evolutionary capitalist Lewski. Hey, Bonnie, I thought you liked nebulous laws, like with the start of someone's right to self-ownership. And what do you guys know about the market?
Yeah, because I talked about some law that I made up. I made up a law, Skeeter.
You did. You love when I discussed with you about children's where rights begin. You love the idea that rights were nebulous, right? I even have it queued up if you want.
That's not a law. That's kind of the whole point. Okay, let me talk, Skeeter, or else I'm not going to talk to you. Like I said, I can drop you right now. So I didn't say that a law should be nebulous. I just think that some things are by their nature literally undefinable, and therefore they shouldn't be written down into laws because you can't.
Like natural law?
Yeah, exactly. So you can't write that thing down into a law that this thing always goes that way. Like each person becomes able to take care of themselves at 18 years old. No, that shouldn't be a law. So you're actually exactly incorrect on what I said. So you've just demonstrated your inability to ever understand what I'm saying, no matter how many conversations we have about this thing.
Well, you're criticizing government on one hand for being nebulous about law, and you refuse to define natural law that would occur in a libertarian society. Now,
I've never refused to define natural law. I do it all the time. He's just lying. He's stupid or lying. Go ahead.
I would be absolutely happy to define. It's very, very simple. We believe in non-aggression, which is specifically you do not get to initiate force
or accept force initiated.
Yeah. Well, actually, no. That is not true.
Oh, okay.
You get to decide for yourself whether you're going to intervene or not. So that's the thing. It's all about negative rights. I have a right not to have anything stolen from me. Now, I don't have a right to you stopping someone else from stealing anything from me. I just have a right to you not stealing from me. And I have a right to them not stealing from me, which they are violating. Now, you can decide for yourself how you feel about what risk you might be taking on to defend my property. And, you make your choices, you make your gambles, you live your life, and you do the best that you can. But I don't have any right to your action. There's no positive rights.
Like some kind of right that someone else should defend you if you're being aggressed upon. So does that answer your question, Skeeter, or you just want to keep pretending it doesn't?
No, absolutely not. Shameless pioneer. I have some hypotheticals for you to deal with that rule, right? Do parents have the authority to tell what a kid should do or not?
That is an excellent question.
I'm not going to let him talk for 30 minutes. You can just answer a question.
Right. So it's an excellent question because we're dealing with a human being who is very clearly not fully capable of making their own decisions. And that's how we come into this world. So a usually helpful thing is to think, what if my friend was really, really drunk? And a lot of times, that is the behavior of children. So here's how this actually works. Since we know that humans come into this world without being fully capable of making their own decisions, we have it set up so that they get a trustee automatically. And if you are one of the parents, especially the mother is how it usually works out, but if you're the parents, you get first crack at trusteeship because it's an extremely valuable position. You have someone who, if you do it right, will be so grateful for everything that you've done for them that they will propagate your ideas into the world, take care of you in your old age. It's an extraordinary position. It's very, very valuable. So we give the parents first crack at that. And if they don't want the job, well, then we figure out who's going to have this job because none of us can stomach there not being a trustee for an incapacitated human.
And usually that would go to grandparents or aunts and uncles.
Right. That's usually how it goes. Sometimes it'll be, okay, well, we're going to put them up for adoption, and we figure out, okay, well, how do we set this up so that there is this, liability and responsibility and accountability for the person who becomes the trustee. But they still own themselves. And yes, as the trustee of that person, of that property, you have to make your gambles. And you have to figure out, I think that you will be grateful if I do this when you become a fully cognizant adult being. And maybe you'll be wrong about that. And maybe you'll be so wrong about that that they'll sue you when they get old enough. But those are the risks. On the other hand, it tends to work out really well.
It works out a lot less well the further away from somebody having a stock in the child's life is making decisions. So if somebody who doesn't care about the child, has no reason to care about the child, is making the decisions for lives, it works out worse and worse and worse. Do you have anything else to say about that, Skeeter?
That is, this, let me tell you something, senseless pioneer. You don't know anything about the market and its ethics, right?
Coming from you, I take that as an extraordinary compliment.
Look, you don't know when a child can be taken away from the parent, number one. Number two, you don't know when this trusteeship ends. This is where the nebulous part comes in.
Oh, no, it's actually pretty simple.
It's actually so true that it's nebulous in this instance because putting a very literal, very hard and fast rule on something that is, by its nature, like I said, nebulous, that's a bad thing as well. Go ahead.
Well, and so here's the thing. Yes, it has to end. And no, it's not reasonable to end it at the same time for every person. So, for example, some of us, through one way or another, through injury, through genetic abnormality, through defect, some of us actually never reach the point where we can become fully cognizant, decision-making adults. So we have to include that possibility. So we can't just say, 18, whether or not you're capable of anything. So that's not a good way to do this. It's been close enough to work some of the time, and that's why it's encoded into all of our laws. But it's not a really good way of doing things. A good way of doing things is prove it. Prove that you are an adult capable of making your own complete decisions. And in the society and culture that we have now, the effective way of doing that is pay your rent. When you can pay your own rent, when you can pay your own way in the world, then
pay your own bills.
Yes, when you get to pay your own bills is when we can recognize that you are definitely an adult.
Yeah, and the thing that's different about what Peakless Mountaineer is saying and a law is that there's no one using gunpoint to enforce it, and it's as soon as you turn something into a hard and fast law and put it into the system where there are people that can put you in jail for messing up things, then it becomes a whole different animal than just like common sense that we're talking about. And we're against laws. So the idea that I'm pro nebulous laws is so stupid. Natural law is just something that exists. Name it whatever you want to call it, but it's not the same as a government law. Thank you for the call, Peakless Mountaineer.
Skeeter.
Oh, sorry.
I'm still here.
Skeeter. That's so insulting. My bad. So basically...
I'm the evolutionary capitalist. It's your boy.
Oh, no. It's such a nightmare to think of him in the studio for 3 hours.
Oh, man. Would that be an interesting show? It would be a rough show.
Wouldn't. Honestly, that's the thing.
Interesting like a train wreck.
That's the thing. Like, you can't get conversations through with him without constantly muting him, and he never understands what you're saying, and he just says the same thing over and over, so it'd be 3 hours of that. So it would suck.
Yeah, it would be a monologue, really.
Yeah, literally. You just have to let him talk the whole time, and then you realize he's just deeply uninteresting anyway. So, back to this article from nrdc.org. This guy was saying that because of the Chevron deference being overturned, instead of deferring to the expertise of agencies on how to interpret ambiguous language in laws pertaining to their work, federal judges now have the power to decide what a law means for themselves. What's so funny is, like, it says pertaining to their work. Most of these people aren't, like, working in the industry. It's not like they're out there digging the coal. They're just, their job is just to be up there and make rules for people.
Yeah, so, like, for example, I'm a massage therapist. Now, I actually do the work.
Mm-hmm.
I work on people. I have the success that I have with working on people. So if we're going to do it this way, where we do, someone writes down a law and then we beat people over the head until they conform with it. Okay, if we're going to do things that way, well, how about you let the massage therapists interpret the laws that have to do with massage therapy? Oh, well, that's not what this is. No, this is the person in charge of licensure gets to interpret that. Now, have they ever massaged anyone in their life?
Some,
maybe.
Perhaps, but not all of them.
Maybe not. They might be completely out of their depth in terms of actually doing the thing that they are regulating. And what they are experienced in is things like HR, things like using a computer, doing paperwork, managing inter-office disputes. That's their expertise, is bureaucracy, not the actual activity that they're regulating.
It's so ridiculous that there are people with that kind of an expertise. But we do have another caller on the line. Turd Ferguson in Pennsylvania, you're on Free Talk Live. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I just wanted to start a petition right now for the whole country that the Shrewsbury Carnival be put on every day for the rest of all eternity.
Oh,
Long
boy.
live the sexy chicas at the Shrewsbury Carnival. Woo!
Just
the what?
Shrewsbury
Pennsylvania. Carnival.
Okay. Well,
what is the Shrewsbury Carnival?
I guess that's a carnival that goes on in the town that Turd Ferguson lives in, and there are sexy chicas there.
Well, I'll tell you what. There's nothing stopping you from continuing this carnival. You've just got to, do all the things that allow a carnival to exist in the free market. And I'll tell you, carnivals are close to the metal when it comes to the free market world.
Oh, they definitely are.
I bet Turd Ferguson couldn't attract a bunch of sexy chicas to his own carnival by his own volition, so...
Alas, all good things must come to an end. See, every niche has its end. There's only so much market demand for any given thing. And the thing about a carnival is that it's special.
Yeah.
If it was there all the time, nobody would go.
Actually, it would really suck. Like, imagine like a really small amusement park in your town that's always there. Like, it wouldn't probably be that great. 603-283-6160. It's Free Talk Live. More coming up. And you can call in with whatever is on your mind, 603-283-6160. It's Free Talk Live. Don't go anywhere.
Did you know that New Hampshire has a legal right to leave the Union? It's simple. Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution lists everything that states are forbidden from doing. Guess what's not on that list? Withdrawing from the Union. Therefore, under the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, the decision to leave is reserved to the states. The New Hampshire Constitution's Articles 7 and 10 say the people have the exclusive right to govern themselves as a free, sovereign, and independent state, and that it's our right to establish a new government. New Hampshire can absolutely 100% choose to leave the Union, but it's a choice for the people of New Hampshire alone. No-fault unilateral divorce is the standard in every developed nation on the planet. When one partner wants to leave their abuser, they do not need bilateral consent. Who would argue that abuse victims can't leave their spouse without permission? You can learn more about how we can peacefully divorce DC at NHindependence.org and join the movement at NHexit.us.
My name is Jacob Hornberger. I'm president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, which Congressman Ron Paul awarded for having an outstanding freedom website. Write us at fff@fff.org, and we'll send you a free 3-month subscription to our monthly journal of libertarian essays and our booklet, Economic Liberty in the Constitution, which George Mason University economics professor Walter Williams praised in a recent column. That's FFF at FFF.org.
What if you want to hear the latest episode of Free Talk Live, but all you have is your phone, you forgot to download our archive, and you have no data connection? You can call our Listen line at 641-793-0191. That's a long-distance number, so you may incur charges. If not, listen as long as you want. 641-793-0191. The Free Talk Live Listen line, 641-793-0191.
You're listening to the live edition of Free Talk Live. Hour number 2 is next after the news here on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.
From Feature Story News in New York, I'm Sally Patterson with a look back at some of the week's top stories.
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
US President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump went head-to-head in a fiery presidential debate televised on Thursday. Hosted in the US city of Atlanta by CNN, this was the first debate of the year between the two presumptive nominees, who are vying to return to the White House in November's election. The pair clashed over immigration, foreign policy and abortion, though the age of both candidates was also in the spotlight.
I spent half my career being criticized as being the youngest person in politics. I was the second youngest person ever elected to the United States Senate, and now I'm the oldest. This guy's 3 years younger and a lot less competent. I think that just look at the record. Look at what I've done. Look how I've turned around the horrible situation he left me.
Well, I took 2 tests, cognitive tests. I aced them. We made it public. He took none. I'd like to see him take one, just one, a real easy one. Like go through the first 5 questions. He couldn't do it.
There was no audience and microphones were muted when it wasn't the candidate's time to speak. Both Democrats and Republicans are acknowledging it was a troublesome debate for the current president, who spoke with a hoarse voice and often stumbled. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange landed back in his native Australia this week after striking a plea deal with US prosecutors. His wife Stella told media he needed time to recover and to get used to freedom after a 14-year legal battle with US officials who accused him of leaking classified documents. Chris Gilbert reports.
After spending 1900 days in Belmarsh prison in the UK and years in exile in London's Ecuadorian embassy, a US judge has ruled that his time already served fulfills a sentence for breaking the Espionage Act for leaking sensitive US government documents. Assange pled guilty, conceding he did violate the Espionage Act, but maintains the law is contradictory to the First Amendment, which he claims he should be protected under as a journalist.
Mark Rutte will be the next leader of the North Atlantic Council, or NATO, the security alliance announced this week. A major task for the former Dutch Prime Minister will be orchestrating NATO's ongoing response to the war in Ukraine. William Denzelo reports from Brussels, where the council is headquartered.
NATO's current Secretary-General says the organisation is in good hands. In a social media post, Jens Stoltenberg added that Mark Rutte is a strong leader and a consensus builder. Rutte served as Dutch Prime Minister 4 times, spanning nearly 14 years. Providing ongoing support for Ukraine will be a top priority when Rutte takes over the post in October. Analysts say the job could be complicated further if Donald Trump wins the US presidency in November. Trump has disparaged the alliance, accusing fellow members of not pulling their weight.
8 crew members who were on the ship that struck a bridge in the US city of Baltimore are finally back in India after 3 months on the vessel. Officials say all, barring one of the original crew, are Indian nationals. Shroshi Mukherjee reports from New Delhi.
The crew members of the Dali ship were not permitted to leave as they were considered witnesses to the accident and didn't have proper documentation to enter the US. But after 3 months, a spokesperson from the ship's company, Synergy Marine, said that 8 crew members have already returned home and 2 more would also leave the United States soon. The men who are back home now will still need to be available for court hearings and depositions, as this accident is still being investigated by the US Coast Guard and the FBI. Shreyoshi Mukherjee, New Delhi.
Jailed US journalist Evan Gershkovich appeared in a Russian court on Wednesday. He stands accused of alleged espionage during a reporting trip in March 2023. Gershkovich's legal team denies all allegations. The White House calls the charges ridiculous and his detention totally illegal. In Moscow, Daria Bundarchuk reports.
Evan Gershkovich appeared standing in a glass box in a courtroom in the city of Yekaterinburg on Wednesday. Media members were allowed to film him only for a few minutes. Then journalists were requested to leave the courtroom as the trial is being held behind closed doors, a common practice in Russia for hearing espionage cases. He faces up to 20 years in prison for alleged spying in a Russian defense enterprise in March 2023. The Wall Street Journal dismissed allegations against Gershkovich as false and baseless charges built on calculated and transparent lies. Russia's President Putin earlier admitted there had been contact with Washington about a potential prisoner swap and stressed that such discussions should be held away from the media attention. Daria Bondarchuk, Moscow.
From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
After a flood of customer complaints, Kay Jewelers issued an immediate recall this week of over 2 million cursed engagement and wedding rings. The company's director of public relations released an apology to those afflicted.
I can assure our customers that we were not aware our manufacturers were sourcing diamonds tainted by the darkling Urla. We're strongly recommending customers who have not yet returned their purchases for a full refund to place a mirror in a bowl of black salt, mold a poppet in your image out of clay and your lover's hair, and then burn the poppet in the mirror before the next full moon.
Industry experts are calling this the most egregious safety oversight in jewelry production since 1973, when Zales disturbed the grave of the 16th century sorcerer Maelor.
Sometimes I wake up and I'm trapped in this oil painting of a German village.
They told us that there was a 68% chance that our child would be born with no soul. They sent us this disclaimer suggesting we leave the changeling in the wood and return only at our own peril.
This is the Onion News Network.
You can stick it to the man and big tech. Join our FTL social mastodon at social.freetalklive.com. Free Talk Live.
Free Talk Live, talk radio that you control, and 603-283-6160 is the phone number. That's 603-283-6160, and Free Talk Live is brought to you by LibertyMinded.com. Official Free Talk Live gear like t-shirts and hoodies are available at LibertyMinded.com. Plus, you'll find a unique collection of cool and funny liberty-oriented clothing at LibertyMinded.com. That's LibertyMinded.com. And with you on Free Talk Live tonight, you've got me, Bonnie.
Riley.
And Peakless Mountaineer.
And we're spending a little more time on the Chevron decision. If you don't know what that means, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled yesterday to overturn the Chevron deference. The Chevron deference was a 1984 decision by a lower court to make it to where every time there's an ambiguous law, the court must defer to the regulatory agencies to interpret the ambiguous language, as long as it's, what did they say, reasonable.
Yeah, as long as Congress hasn't specifically said, here's what you're supposed to interpret this as, then, let's see, so it was that, and as long as it is, like, allowable to interpret it that way, so I guess if it doesn't come into conflict with another law. So if it's legal to interpret it that way, then we're going to interpret it that way.
It's kind of like a something that shows you the state of lack of common sense, because it's like when they wrote the Constitution, they thought, wow, we wrote this in as plain language as possible. No one could interpret it possibly any other way, and they were wrong.
But then people misinterpreted it over centuries, and here we are.
Yep.
Well, so there's misinterpreting it, and then there's just ignoring it.
Yeah.
So, like, they did explicitly put in there, you're not allowed to do things that aren't in here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that was the 10th Amendment, was very specific about, if it's not in here, you can't do it. And they're like, well, we'll just expand this part of it to include everything.
Yeah.
Turns out, everything is interstate commerce.
And that's how that's the loophole they want to use. They want to use the loophole of let's just expand this a little more and a little more and a little more. And people aren't going to notice until, boom, government has all the power.
You see, you blowing your nose means that you had to buy a Kleenex. And even if you bought that in this state, that was a decision that you had to make that could impact the Kleenex sellers from other states. Therefore, federal law applies to you blowing your nose.
And it's not like they could have ever known about like certain technologies. So the fact that some things they say go over, like they say that Bitcoin's selling. I don't know. I don't know if that was Bitcoin specific, but they say that some stuff that's like over telephones and stuff like that is interstate. It's like, how could they have ever known about that being a thing? And then the people who wrote about the interstate commerce and the Constitution, and now today, like anything you do basically crosses state lines because people treat this place like one big country instead of like state to state anyway. So
yeah, and it's truly unfortunate because like one of the solutions in a better world where we actually follow the non-aggression principle is that, yeah, there are going to be certain things that we just can't agree on. Is a fetus a human being? Some of us think so and will not be swayed. Some of us think not and will not be swayed. So what are we going to do? Well, you go over here and we go over here and you do your thing there. And we're fully aware that that's how things work over there. And we'll do our thing here. And you're fully aware that that's how things work over here.
And that's really great, except the world we live in now is so forced to unite on one front. And they think of it as such a grand thing to be united. I mean, yes, it is a great thing to be united. But remember, you have to be united voluntarily, not by force, not by the strong arm of a group of strangers calling themselves government.
Right. Yeah, and that was the brilliance of the idea of having, okay, we will have different states, and each state will have its own absolute set of rules. Mm-hmm. And we won't have this centralized thing that tells everyone what to do. You know, an empire. We've already tried empires. They go poorly, especially for people's rights.
Like in an episode on Sunday, so almost a week ago, that Lori, Richie Rich, and I did, David from New Mexico called in to say that he's moving because somebody moved in like the lot next to him or a few lots away, but not that far away. And one of the things that they're doing that's bothering him is running a generator really loud. And there literally used to be a neighbor in between them that was bothered by the sound of the generator. So he talked to them, made something for them, spent his own money on the materials that would kind of like be like a koozie for the generator, and cut down on noise, gave it to them, and they just didn't implement it. Like he did everything he could to like help them change their actions, you know, talk to them, and it just didn't work. So that neighbor moved away, and now David isn't moving away. And I was just asking questions like, when does it become actually something, okay, like when is something like that actually aggressing onto David's property because like it's making noise that's bothering him and causing his cortisol levels to go up? And no, I didn't like say that is my opinion, that they should be shot for it or something like that. I was just like making it a thought exercise. And basically what I concluded is like he's just making the smartest decision, and he'll live and learn, and next time he moves somewhere, maybe he'll buy more acres, you know, so that way people won't be noisy around him. It's just like so unfortunate. And so a lot of people get stuck like, I shouldn't have to move just because New York is changing the laws to be really crappy and I'm a libertarian. Well, that's the thing. Like, you kind of shouldn't have to. It really sucks that people are being that way, but
sometimes you have to go to a place where you feel like you're the most free.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, the application of principles is messy. Mm-hmm. Like, the principles themselves, they can be categorical. They can be nice and clean. But applying those ideas to reality is where things get fuzzy and squishy and messy. And that's just life. That's how it is. And we have different people with different ideas about how these principles should be applied. So the best that we can do is figure out how to go hang out with the people who agree most of the time on the most important things with you. And let the people who disagree the most on the most important things be as far from you as possible. And yeah, part of that is, so how courts used to work is that you would have peers, actual peers, members of your own real community.
You mean people that you actually associated with on a daily basis or a regular basis?
That's exactly it. People who were actually in your social structure instead of this imaginary corporate structure where, oh, well, you see, since they're part of your municipality, they're part of their peerage. No. They don't know me. We've never met. We don't agree on anything. They're in completely different societies.
This person specifically said they hate free staters.
Right? For example.
Yeah.
That is very clearly not a member of my community, not a peer, not someone that I should be expected to be in judgment of, and certainly not someone who I will ever accept being in judgment of me. Now, on the other hand, if a bunch of free staters have a jury where they stand in judgment of me, it's like, okay, well, you believe in the non-aggression principle. At least there is some point of agreement where we might possibly be part of the same thing. And that's how these are supposed to work, is that because humans are not these atomized creatures. We are social beings by our nature, and the rare exception tends to drive us mad and kill us when we are not allowed to be part of a social structure. That is what tends to happen. So we're actually supposed to decide these things together and figure out, okay, how does this group of humans want to apply these ideas? And have we come up against other ideas that we want to incorporate into our identity as a people?
And that's this is really close to the conversation. I basically already described it. And my question was, would it ever be okay to bring to a fair court with your peers this problem? Hey, I'm David from New Mexico.
Totally.
I lived here first, and these people, they've gotten every chance, and now they won't make their generator quieter for me. He brings in blood tests where he shows that his cortisol levels have risen because of the annoyance this is bringing him, and then scientific studies that show that cortisol is so bad for your body. And so here's my damages, and all I want is for them to put I don't know what else to call it, the cover on the generator to make it quieter, and then if they refuse, can this ever be something that gets raised?
Oh
to
yeah,
level
absolutely. So this is what's called an easement. So okay, I have always walked this path through here, and I've had this agreement with these people that I get to walk, even though it's on their property and they're the ones maintaining this area, I get to walk through here. And then someone else buys this property and they're like, well, no, you can't walk through here. This is mine. And so you go to the court to decide whether it is reasonable to go, well, no, I already had this easement. Or, for another example of okay, well, I have this place here because of its beautiful view. And you are about to strip mine my beautiful view. Mm-hmm. So that is taking away from my easement. And yeah, it's squishy. I don't know, it's tricky. It's hard to determine where exactly are easements. Oh, you actually have to decide as a human being and as a community.
Yeah.
Where do you believe the line gets drawn?
I think libertarianism is the philosophy that really forces people to really work together because you actually have to communicate.
Right.
And you have to be on the same page when it comes to principles. And that's really hard for people these days because we're not very good at communicating. We're better at being keyboard warriors on social media than we are sitting down with our neighbor and talking to them.
Yeah. Well, and this is why it would be so beautiful to have a market in court systems. So that, okay, hypothetically, let's say that everyone can easily agree that there should be that, koozie or whatever on the generator. Mm-hmm. Let's say that is just so plumb obvious. And then we have this court system, which we are forced to be a part of, and it says, no, that's fine. Doesn't break any of our statutes, so that's okay. Well, there's nothing we can do about that. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you had a market in court systems and they pulled that kind of nonsense where something that's very obvious to everyone is not what they're implementing, then people go, oh, well, I'm going to unsubscribe from your service.
Yeah.
And I'm going to subscribe to your competitors because they're doing basically the same thing you are. They're, stopping people from thieving and murdering and fraud and all of that, but they're doing it better.
Yep.
They're interpreting things correctly, and they're using less violence.
And that's what sucks a lot of the time when somebody is faced with a situation where they end up getting a restraining order on someone, and it's their last resort, and a libertarian instantly judges them. A lot of times I like to say, like, they're kind of forced into that system, and if we had a competition of systems, you wouldn't be mad at them for doing it with a not coercive state version of the same thing. But what are they supposed to do? Go and shoot this person and then go to prison for the rest of their life over it because the government was like, you didn't do the thing we want you to do, which is to go to court and get a restraining order and let us, quote unquote, protect you. Like, I don't know. I just think...
And never mind that they are not obligated to enforce it under any circumstances.
Yeah. Yep, they're just absolutely terrible, and having a competition in markets is... I mean, a competition in... I don't even want to say laws, because that's the whole thing. Like, using common sense to look at things and find out what's right is different than, like, writing down a law and making it hard and fast.
Yeah, dispute resolution is really what it comes down to. They have a monopoly in dispute resolution. And yeah, we are trained to think of this in very specific ways. Like, we're not trained to think about the fact that statutes and laws might be different. And we're certainly not trained to think about the idea that you might not need to write everything down. That maybe this idea where you write down absolutely every possible way that someone can break principles has to do this way and has to be defined this way, and this has to be the exact punishment that's meted out. Maybe that's not actually the best way of dealing with this.
It's too dogmatic, really. I mean, it doesn't deal with every situation properly. Every situation is so different that you can't just have a dogmatic rule book all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we sort of inherited this system from Rome and France, which is really, really unfortunate because we ended up with the worst of both worlds. Because there's two very different systems. There's sort of the English system and the French system, and we ended up with the worst parts of both. Now, with the English system, what we inherited was the idea that we can just keep changing things and keep changing things. Now, the upside of that system was that there wasn't this idea that you have to write down every possible way that you can violate a principle, and unless it's written down, then it's not actually violating that principle. It was, no, we as a community know what the principles are, and we don't actually have to write them down. We just know. And so then you can go, oh, well, we, the community, figured out that that was a violation of principle. So we would look into that part of it. And that sort of, it gained what you call precedent in legal courts. And that's really the downside, is because once you have an established precedent, then you can just oppress people forever. So that part's part of our system. But the fact that, like, no, we're a community that knows what our principles are is not part of our system. And the upside of the French and Roman system is that at least they had a set of rules that they weren't supposed to just, oh, well, we're going to interpret this differently now. Like, that was the upside, was like, okay, well, at least if you're doing this thing where you write down every possible way of violating the principle, then if someone does a thing that you didn't write down, then they're innocent. But we managed to not even do that part. So we attempt to write down every possible way of violating a principle, and then we will expand it if and when we feel like it. Such as, I've decided that that is funds, and that is payment. I mean, it's a completely novel technology that I don't begin to try to pretend to understand.
But I'm going to define it this way so I can have total control over it.
Right.
And it's way worse when you're a person who, not that I think democracy is so great, but I mean, at the very least, they could be someone who is elected and they even pretend it's somebody who is not elected and not responsible, meaning that no matter what happens to you because of what they decided, well, they're not going to get any responsibility for it. It will never affect their lives ever, and they'll die super rich and happy.
Yeah. So one of the things I looked into, like, where this the Chevron case came from. So, and just to give a little bit of backstory here, so we basically inherited the English system, and one of the things that the English system had screwed up was that basically pollution was exempt from the law. Now, what had happened is they're like, well, this industrial revolution that we're doing is so important to our country that it is in the best interests of the people that you don't get to sue the factory, no matter how black they made your lungs.
Wow. And in England, I know that they basically deforested everything.
Right. And we inherited that system. So it was this chronic problem that it's incredibly difficult to, when they pollute so much that they cause thousands and thousands of people to get leukemia, it is still almost impossible to get them to pay 1 red cent for doing so because the court system is screwed up. But so you had this advocacy group that was saying, hey, this is a violation of the Clean Air Act because this is a source of pollution. And they were suing on this idea of like, well, wait, no, you can't just change the definition of source. You can't just say, oh, well, unless it's an entire factory, it doesn't count as a source. You can't do that.
Wow.
And the judge said, yes, they absolutely can.
Wow. So that was the Chevron decision?
Yeah, that was where this came from in the first place, is they were saying, well, no, you can't just contract the definition of source so that it no longer applies to Chevron. And the judge said, yes, they can. And in fact, now they can do that forever.
Wow.
Well, not anymore, only for 40 years.
One thing that's really crazy about it that I don't know if this article gets into, but basically the decision says that this isn't going to be enacted retroactively. So, like, what you're talking about, that exact thing, like, they said source, and therefore Chevron didn't get any, wasn't blamed. Well, that's not going to be overturned now.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice?
That's crazy. So things were done possibly wrong for 40 years, and now we're just going to live with that.
Well, they want to cover their butts on this one because they don't want to be liable for having put this responsibility in the hands of people who should never have had that power to begin with. They don't want to go, hey, well, wait a second. Actually, Judge, you broke the law by allowing this to be interpreted in this way. They don't want those kinds of cases.
Maybe this was the only way that this decision was going to be overturned. Maybe
Probably.
Like they were like kind of, threatened like, hey, if you overturn this, like, look at all this stuff that's going to have to get reworked. Like, you can't overturn this. And then if they just like agreed to that one little loophole, then at least it's better for the future.
Well, one suspicion I have about this, because, there's still plenty of leftist judges on the Supreme Court. So why would only 3 of them still oppose this? And I think one of the issues is that I've been sort of looking into why people are scared of a new Donald Trump presidency. And one of the things that is being floated around is the possibility of sort of cracking open this untouchable bureaucratic state. So that actually, no, since those are the enactment of the executive branch's orders, we actually get to change a bunch of these bureaucrats.
That's a thing that Donald Trump did really well, is that he brought light to the horrors of the bureaucratic state, and people don't like that. Especially the state-worshipping tyrants that we have in power now. They don't want light shone on their work. They don't want light shone on their dark deeds.
Yeah, so it may very well be that of the left judges who voted in favor of this, that they were really concerned with, oh, well, Trump's just going to get in there. He's going to replace our bureaucratic state with his bureaucratic state. And if he does that, then his bureaucratic state will get to interpret all of these laws. Well, shoot, we better claw that back from him before he gets it.
It's almost like don't give a part of the government power if you don't want your other side to get that power in their hands.
That is always the principle. Never give them a power that you would not want in the hands of your worst enemies.
So this is a quote in this article from Elena Kagan, one of the 3 justices that dissented. She said, in one fell swoop, the majority today gives itself exclusive power over every open issue, no matter how expertise-driven or policy-laden, involving the meaning of regulatory law. We'll get more into this in a minute. It's Free Talk Live. You can call 603-283-6160 with whatever's on your mind. That's 603-283-6160. It's Free Talk Live. More coming up.
So the protection of life, liberty, and property is what the Free State Project is all about. But it's an effort to move 20,000 people who understand.
It's about demonstrating to the entire country
that, yeah, we can have a free market, a truly free market.
Making it just a freer, great place to live.
It's the world's largest voluntarist libertarian community, and it's only getting bigger.
That's amazing, to be able to move to a place where other people passionately believe in being free and independent.
What the Free State Project is managing to do, though, is to put their money where their mouth is. It's physically getting up across the country and saying, let's go someplace and let's demonstrate the power of these ideas. There's a lot of kind of philosophy that surrounds liberty. There's a lot of thinking about it and talking about it. But here in New Hampshire, people are doing it.
101 Reasons Liberty Lives in New Hampshire, a documentary by Free State Project Early Movers. Watch it free at 101reasonsfilm.com. 101reasonsfilm.com.
From Feature Story News in New York, I'm Sally Patterson with a look back at some of the week's top stories.
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
US President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump went head-to-head in a fiery presidential debate, televised on Thursday. Hosted in the US city of Atlanta by CNN, this was the first debate of the year between the two presumptive nominees, who are vying to return to the White House in November's election. The pair clashed over immigration, foreign policy and abortion, though the age of both candidates was also in the spotlight.
I spent half my career being criticized as being the youngest person in politics. I was the second youngest person ever elected to the United States Senate, and now I'm the oldest. This guy's 3 years younger and a lot less competent. I think that just look at the record. Look at what I've done. Look how I've turned around the horrible situation he left me.
Well, I took 2 tests, cognitive tests. I aced them. We made it public. He took none. I'd like to see him take one, just one, a real easy one. Like go through the first 5 questions. He couldn't do it.
There was no audience and microphones were muted when it wasn't the candidate's time to speak. Both Democrats and Republicans are acknowledging it was a troublesome debate for the current president, who spoke with a hoarse voice and often stumbled. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange landed back in his native Australia this week after striking a plea deal with US prosecutors. His wife Stella told media he needed time to recover and to get used to freedom after a 14-year legal battle with US officials who accused him of leaking classified documents. Chris Gilbert reports.
After spending 1,900 days in Belmarsh prison in the UK and years in exile in London's Ecuadorian embassy, a US judge has ruled that his time already served fulfills a sentence for breaking the Espionage Act for leaking sensitive US government documents. Assange pled guilty, conceding he did violate the Espionage Act, but maintains the law is contradictory to the First Amendment, which he claims he should be protected under as a journalist.
Mark Rutte will be the next leader of the North Atlantic Council, or NATO, the security alliance announced this week. A major task for the former Dutch Prime Minister will be orchestrating NATO's ongoing response to the war in Ukraine. William Denzelo reports from Brussels, where the council is headquartered.
NATO's current Secretary-General says the organisation is in good hands. Rutte served as Dutch Prime Minister 4 times, spanning nearly 14 years. Providing ongoing support for Ukraine will be a top priority when Rutte takes over the post in October. Analysts say the job could be complicated further if Donald Trump wins the US presidency in November. Trump has disparaged the alliance, accusing fellow members of not pulling their weight.
That's your roundup of news making headlines this week. Sally Patterson reporting.
Don't miss a moment of Free Talk Live. Get our archives daily via our podcast at feeds.freetalklive.com.
That means talk radio that you control, so you can call 603-283-6160. That's 603-283-6160. We already have someone on the line. But first, are you tired of the oppressive rules and moderation of the big tech social media sites? Our Mastodon server at social.freetalklive.com can set you free. Mastodon is free, open source, decentralized, and federated. Multiple apps are available for iOS, Android, Windows, Mac, and Linux. social.freetalklive.com for that. And with you on Free Talk Live tonight, you've got me, Bonnie.
Riley.
And Peakless Mountaineer.
And we have Sarah from New Mexico on the line. Sarah, you're on Free Talk Live. What's on your mind?
Oh, yes. We have a Republican city councilor, Champagne. He's fighting back and forth about putting the commercials, those ugly advertisements on the buses and the bus stops again. So I'm assuming that he's getting paid by these companies to want these ugly advertisements, Wouldn't
you want to run down the price of the bus?
We all wanted them off and just put beautiful pictures about New Mexico and like a nonprofit, like a service announcement, things that people get help. Those are okay, but no. So I guess the Republicans are pro-business. It's that what it's about. They like to help businesses that pay them.
That's because businesses help people ultimately because businesses help put money through the economy.
I guess so, but they're more business than other people. But I have been tortured. I mean, by looking at these ugly, like giant, ugly people's faces of car salespeople for years and
Most
years.
of the murals they put on businesses that cities, pay people and steal from the taxpayer to put on businesses and on brick walls in cities are ugly pictures of ugly people's faces commemorating some dumb person no one cares about, and they're always ugly. That's the thing. I've always saying, like, I've never seen a mural I liked.
Well, this is not a mural. That's what's more. It's more like for-profit commercial, like a car sales.
I know, but I'm making a point that if they just hire someone to make a beautiful art about New Mexico, all it's going to be is some ugly thing because leftists have no souls and they can't meme.
It's not leftists. It's government bureaucrats.
Government definitely has no souls.
Well,
so, Sarah, have you, Sarah?
Yeah.
Sarah, have you considered looking away from them?
It's torture.
Well, you know what people's been doing? The people have been demolishing it, breaking the lights, breaking the glass, everything that has advertisement. People have been tearing it all up. So I have no idea.
And you're in favor of that.
She's on their side.
Is that right? That you are in favor of them tearing that apart?
Well, you know what? I'm not strong enough to tear it apart, but I can understand why these alcoholic people, they look at that ugly thing and they're fed up with it.
And if you were strong enough, you would destroy that property as well.
Huh?
And if you were strong enough, you would destroy that property as well.
Well, I did kick it a couple of times and they hit it or something like that. But I got to the point where I put up with it. But it was somebody else's idea to wrap it with New Mexico pictures. I was like, wait a minute. There's somebody else that are tired of looking at these pictures.
So this is hold on. So this is this is at the bus stops. The pictures that they put up. Now is that? Sorry.
Well, they wrap the buses and also the bus shelters.
So
they have places where they put the advertisement.
Okay, so now, so they're taking tax dollars to put those up, right?
No, they get money from the businesses.
Oh,
so the businesses
It's driving the price of the bus and running the bus down. And Sarah doesn't want that. She wants. If the thing is, like, if you want a picture of a beautiful New Mexico landscape, why don't you just not live in Albuquerque and live where you can see the beautiful New Hampshire landscape, which is most of the other parts of the state.
Well, the thing is, a lot of people do want these alternative pictures that they have been putting on the bus. It's just Mr. Champagne. All of a sudden, he wants to put the commercials back on. Like, there's a lot of people that are tired of looking at it. So they decided to get rid of all of it. Now he wants to bring it back, and there's a fight over it. And that's why I'm hoping that somebody like David or somebody listens to me in New Mexico and get mad about it. Because otherwise, they're going to tear up all the advertisements again. If they don't want the bus shelter to be vandalized, why do they want to put the advertisements?
Do you really think these drunk people are going to not tear up some ugly picture of, some important quote-unquote leftist that lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico that they put up and put a little quote by him? These alcoholics are probably going to destroy it too.
The bus shelters that have no advertisement, nobody tears those up. the ones that are really old.
And they're
ones
probably
that
still
they
ugly
have
to look
been
at.
advertising, they've been tearing those up. That's the difference.
Bus stops are ugly to look at, so.
I mean, I got to tell you, if it's their property, they should be allowed to put up whatever picture they want to put up. And if they're getting paid, okay, good for them. Now, I'll tell you what bothers me about this is that in my experience, every time that you actually dig into any bus system ever, they cannot run these efficiently enough as a market to make money off of them. So every single bus system that I have ever encountered was tax subsidized. So what bothers me about this is that they're taking money from the taxpayers, they're then buying this thing and putting up these signs that they get paid to put up.
Yeah, but if advertisements were ran to fund the government as opposed to just stealing from people, I think that would be a net positive. But this is why leftists can't have nice things. They're like, no, we want you to keep stealing from people, and I'm totally fine with destruction because, well, it belongs to all of us, you know. It's just like a big disgusting loop. In like at the same time choosing to live in a hideous city, like a huge, gross, ugly city, and complaining about beauty, like the bus stop itself is hideous. All right. That's all I have to say about that. You guys?
I don't have anything to say.
Well, in the last few segments, we've been taking due time, I'd say, to talk about this ending of the Chevron decision. And right at the end of the last segment, I was reading this quote from Justice Elena Kagan in her dissent from the ruling. She was one of the 3 big bad leftists who disagreed with this. She said, in one fell swoop, the majority today gives itself exclusive power over every open issue. Almost like the Constitution was written that way, where the the judicial branch has that power. So, given itself exclusive power over every open issue, no matter how expertise-driven or policy-laden, involving the meaning of regulatory law. There's always such thing as amicus briefs and experts coming into the court to explain things to the courts. I just don't see why we're even dealing with these judges at all if they can't be trusted to apply things the way the law says them. Oh, if there's some nuance there, take into some consideration and use common sense.
Yeah, I mean, so like the reason this came in the first place was that the EPA decided that, oh, well, a single change in how you're doing things can't count as a source of pollution. It has to be a whole factory. Now, they had decided previously that it could be just a change in the way that you're doing this could be a source of pollution. But then they overturned their own decision as a government agency and said, no, it's got to be a whole factory or it's not a source.
That just goes against common sense. Like, how could you think that? Like, one change in a thing that puts out like microplastics into, let's say something way worse, like just pumps oil into a river. How could you say, well, that doesn't count as pollution?
Yeah, and the thing for me is just how ripe for corruption is this?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there is no way to get a bureaucrat to lose their job.
It's very difficult to get bureaucrats to lose their job. I mean, the EPA has polluted rivers.
Right. So like,
who held them accountable?
Yeah. And how easy is it for one of these corporations to bribe a bureaucrat to interpret this term in a different way?
It's way too easy.
And then there's nothing with it ever can be done about it. Whereas at least putting it in the hands of the judges, there is some possible way that someone else might become the judge for that area. Whereas the bureaucrat, no, there's no possible way. And it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to show, oh, here's where you were actually paid off by, Chevron or whoever to interpret this in this way. It's extremely difficult for some, random bureaucrat for us to dig into what they've been up to and what their bank accounts and all of that are. Whereas someone who's at least something of a public figure in a judge, we can go, well, no, hold on, let me see your bank account. Have you been paid off by Chevron to interpret source in this broad way?
And the other thing about it, we were bringing up SEC a lot at the beginning because they did this whole thing to Jeremy Kauffman's business library last year, where they were the judge had to defer to them for all these decisions.
Right.
They ultimately destroyed the library.
Right.
Well, they were quoted. They were having a conference about. I don't think that they were specifically talking about library. Well, I don't think they said they were, but it was during the same time period, and it was like on the same issues. Well, they said, we don't want to come right out with what the rules are, because if we come out right out with what the rules are, then people will know how to get around them. So that they purposely make this as nebulous as possible, so they can flip it up on you when it's
which is
convenient to
the
them.
opposite of their job. And they will, of course, say, "Oh, well, we made it so easy for you. Just come in." They will say to every single time, "Oh no, we made it so easy. Just come on in."
Yeah, you should have just come and asked us before starting the business. No.
But then they change every rule on you, so when you come in 10 years or 5 years after you started your business, everything's changed on you.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it is almost impossible to get rid of the head of the SEC, let alone any of his underlings. Like, the head of the SEC might get removed if we can get the majority of Congress to agree. Then maybe we can get rid of one guy. Possibly. But every single underling of his? No. And the fact that they've interpreted, because it's the Howey test, right? For like, is this a security or not? And wouldn't you know it, they decided in the library case that it was a security. But they decided in the Ripple case
that it wasn't. We can decide any way we want to just to fit our decisions.
Yeah, and if you look at the actual facts of the matter, like, Ripple was way more centralized. There was very much more clearly like a specific group of people that was that you were expecting to make profit from their activities. Whereas with Ripple, the specific group of people was like everybody who's making video.
Oh, you mean library, yeah.
Yeah, with library, that was the efforts of someone else. You mean the market?
They can define things that are absolutely upside down. Like in Jeremy Kaufman's library case, they said that, well, if you're making profit off of something before it goes out, well, then it's a security. And I said, well, weren't you giving it away for free? And he said, yes. And they said that that's profiting. They just said that that's...
Yeah, that's not profiting at all. It's just giving something away.
They just defined it as something that's absolutely not how that actual word is used, because they're not speaking English, they're speaking legalese.
Yeah, and some faceless bureaucrat that makes these absurd decisions can never, ever be removed. And I'm not saying it's easy to get a judge replaced, but at least it's possible. If a judge made that determination of, oh, well, I like XRP, so Ripple is not a security. And I don't like you because you're letting people talk to each other. So library is a security. At least it would be possible to be like, that particular judge needs to be removed. And then if you manage to do it, it sends a signal to the rest of the Justice Department of like, oh, well, as a judge, I can't get away with that. Whereas when this faceless bureaucrat does this, there's no way to remove him, and there's no way to send a signal of, hey, don't do this, or you'll lose your job.
So we do have a caller on the line. We have Jet. Jet, you're on Free Talk Live. What's on your mind?
Well, the government turned on its lights and pulled me over the other day.
You mean the people calling themselves government?
My condolences.
And when the government came to my door, the government said, I pulled you over because you were driving below the speed limit. Are you okay? Well, I was initially surprised that the government cared whether I was okay or not. But now, from our previous discussions, I know a lot of people respond to the government, it's like, I don't answer questions. But my strategy to government questions is to ask my own questions. So when this government asked me questions like, where are you coming from? I replied, is that important? But the government asked me, then do you have any weapons in the car? So I asked, were you in the military? The government said, yes. So I asked, how did you find a weapon? He left and went back to his car. Now, did you see that the government beat up this First Amendment auditor last weekend? Just wanted to find out if you guys talked about
beat up this First Amendment what?
Auditor?
Auditor.
Oh, yeah. No.
No,
Carolina,
I hadn't heard about
Fort
that.
Worth. Yeah, 5'3" senior woman. The government slammed her to the pavement, broke her head open, dislocated her shoulder and elbow.
I was on Wednesday when you brought it up.
Yeah, typically, she's very well known for going around and holding police accountable, that kind of thing. And she had previous experience with this one government person. I had to use it that way, I guess, this time. But yeah, I just wanted to point out that that the movement is growing, and I like the idea that people are holding their government accountable. It's just not happening enough. I was planning myself on doing some of that. I have all the equipment and things, but I haven't found a lawyer yet who will be ready and willing to jump in when I need them.
Yeah,
So
you can't just depend on any old one of those.
Yeah, I got to say, to the First Amendment auditors, and especially this one that's had to suffer physical attack for doing so, thank you for your service.
Indeed, that's brave service that you're giving us.
now, I'm hoping that you had a little fun when I was using every term called the government or this government or
I think that's fantastic.
Show you,
Yeah, you never do that.
Yeah, it's very strange that people, like, when you physically get pulled over, like, oh, well, you don't say the government pulled me over. You don't say the government walked up to my door when, I mean, that's what's actually happening. Like, they're not acting like a human being. They're acting as an office. The office of the government is the one that's threatening you with violence.
the agents. Yeah, well, you can probably guess that a lot of my my goal was to show you that we really shouldn't use this global term, this universal term, ever.
Really? Because I got to say, you've probably done the exact opposite on me there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, henceforth, I will no longer refer to officers as anything other than the government.
Because
unless it's a really good idea to do otherwise.
Yeah, that might even help people start to think about it more. But that was pretty much all I had, except I could throw in things about. I'm still amazed at this thing we call borders, between states.
Mm-hmm.
I'm living up here on the border of Washington and Idaho, and over in Washington, I can go into a gun store and ask for all kinds of things that they may not have. I can go 10 minutes into Idaho, and they can supply me with any type of thing I could ever desire, suppressors, machine guns, whatever. And it's just an amazing difference. Plus, over in Washington, you can go buy all the cannabis you want in whatever form you want. But over here in Idaho, if they catch you with some of this all stuff, you can go to jail for 10 years.
Wow.
It's just a
That's the
wonderful
arbitrary thing about magical lines in the sand.
Well, and I mean, ultimately, all it's made up of is threats. They're saying these threats apply to this side, and those threats apply to that side.
Anything else for us, Jet?
Yeah, just real quick. This is why more people need to recognize that these things we call state really shouldn't exist, because it's just they're separate countries in the first hand. They have their own laws, their own uniforms, their own colors, their own flag, their own state bird. It just drives me nuts that everyone has their own rules, and I have to try to figure out what they are if I want to move between one or the other.
Yeah, Bob, obviously laws aren't written to be just this, oh, well, these are moral facts and we wrote them down. That if that was the case, then 10 minutes of space wouldn't change something from being 10 years in prison to who cares.
Right. It would be a matter of like, okay, well, since those are your rules here, let me get arrested so that I can talk to the judge and be like, well, look, the obvious principle is this. But everyone knows that's suicide.
Yep.
Everyone knows that's not how this works.
Yep.
Yeah, and as far as the strategy there goes, it's an excellent strategy to just use questions. And it also works very well in court, that rather than answering them, answer a question with a question. And there is this very strange thing that, like, as soon as you answer a question, you become liable.
Mm-hmm.
But no matter what question you pose, you're allowed to pose questions.
Yep. Yeah, I hadn't really thought of that before. Maybe because and thank you for the call so much, Jet. Maybe my thought process is speak to them as little as possible because they're just like this thug who is out to get you and like less than human because of the way they're acting.
That's usually a very good approach, but sometimes it's good to ask questions with questions.
This definitely, I think what he implied was that the cop left him alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seemed to be, it seemed to be the case. And I mean, it's the more tools you have, the more room you have for maneuvering. And yeah, you just got to feel it out. Sometimes just say as little as possible because they have a chip on their shoulder. They're out to get you. That does happen. And you just want to clam up as much as possible. Just, I don't answer questions. Sometimes that's the right tactic. Sometimes it's a better tactic to be as friendly as possible with them. And asking questions is a nice little way of being friendly without becoming liable.
But the only thing I can think of is just like, I feel like a lot of times they take that, they're going to, like the wrong cop is going to take that as, oh, you're questioning, like, okay, for example, a friend of mine got pulled over and I was in the car with him for being about to turn around in a parking lot, then seeing a sign that said not to, and turning around and leaving. The cop pulled them over and was like, hey, I saw you do that, and we're just trying to make sure people don't go through that parking lot because a lot of accidents happen. He said, oh, a lot of accidents happen at this time of night? And the cop was like, yeah, because he could tell what he was getting at. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. It's
because that's absurd.
Yeah, and it is legally defensible to ask more questions.
Mm-hmm.
And legally speaking, you are not liable for asking questions. However, socially speaking, you can definitely upset an officer and make them decide that they're going to go after you by asking questions that they find to be insulting or undermining their authority.
Or just seeming like the caterpillar from Alice in Wonderland. Like, I wouldn't want to be like, and what is that? Just like asking weird little riddles, like, I don't know. I think I'd rather just be like, I'm not very talkative right now. And I don't have to talk to you, and that's the law, or that's the rules, and then that's all there is to it. Because I used to try to just say what I could get away with before I really knew my rights. And I remember this one time a cop being like, "Why are you so defensive right now?" And all I was doing was asking like, "Am I free to go?" Because I like knew a little bit at that point, but like not really a lot. And I was just saying like, "Am I free to go?" And he's talking, "Am I free to go?" And he's like, "Why are you so defensive right now?" Starts screaming at me. Why are you nervous? He said, like, because there's a man with a gun stopping me and not allowing me to leave.
Because there's a highwayman stopping me.
Because I've been detained illegally, and I'm just asking you, hey, can I leave yet?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's you have to be aware of your own abilities in order to make that decision well, for sure.
Yeah.
603-283-6160. I guess the smartest thing to do is to just really read up on what your rights are, especially relating to what state you're in. 603-283-6160. It's Free Talk Live. More coming up.
There is no such thing as attention span, according to Jerry Seinfeld, who figures that people have an infinite attention span if you are entertaining them. Hey, he's kept us from channel surfing for several decades, and now he's making more millions as a Las Vegas headliner. With money and attention so scarce now, effective communication skills have never been more important, especially if you're looking for work. So choose every single word as though it was the last word the person you're speaking to will hear. Otherwise, it might be. Avoid redundancies such as added bonus, advance warning, end result, prior history, or personal belongings. And avoid cliches like the plague. Just kidding. For more tips, hit survivalspeech.com. I'm Holland Cook.
There are basically two types of advertising: direct response and branding. Radio's great for direct response with its low cost to listener ratio, but audio can't be beat for branding, which is a longer term endeavor. You want to be the first thing that someone thinks of when they think about your product or service. If you have a local business that you want kept top of mind in your community, call the station. If you need national reach, Free Talk Live's got around 200 radio stations, millions of monthly listening sessions, can suit all budgets, and if we don't think we're right for you, we'll tell you. Email me, mark@freetalklive.com.
Tired of cancel culture? Sick of mega tech corporations holding an axe over your head? Join the LRN.FM Matrix chat server. It's self-hosted, so no one else can tell us what to do or say. Don't like the existing channels? You can make your own. You can even connect into some of our channels from other Matrix servers. It's federated. For the full LRN.FM Matrix experience, though, you should join our server via the step-by-step instructions at chat.lrn.fm. Chat.lrn.fm.
You're listening to the live edition of Free Talk Live. Hour number 3 is next after the news here on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.
From Feature Story News in New York, I'm Sally Patterson with a look back at some of the week's top stories.
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
US President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump went head-to-head in a fiery presidential debate, televised on Thursday. Hosted in the US city of Atlanta by CNN, this was the first debate of the year between the two presumptive nominees, who are vying to return to the White House in November's election. The pair clashed over immigration, foreign policy and abortion, though the age of both candidates was also in the spotlight.
I spent half my career being criticized as being the youngest person in politics. I was the second youngest person ever elected to the United States Senate, and now I'm the oldest. This guy's 3 years younger and a lot less competent. I think that just look at the record. Look at what I've done. Look how I've turned around the horrible situation he left me.
Well, I took 2 tests, cognitive tests. I aced them. We made it public. He took none. I'd like to see him take one, just one, a real easy one. Like go through the first 5 questions. He couldn't do it.
There was no audience and microphones were muted when it wasn't the candidate's time to speak. Both Democrats and Republicans are acknowledging it was a troublesome debate for the current president, who spoke with a hoarse voice and often stumbled. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange landed back in his native Australia this week after striking a plea deal with US prosecutors. His wife Stella told media he needed time to recover and to get used to freedom after a 14-year legal battle with US officials who accused him of leaking classified documents. Chris Gilbert reports.
After spending 1,900 days in Belmarsh prison in the UK and years in exile in London's Ecuadorian embassy, a US judge has ruled that his time already served fulfills a sentence for breaking the Espionage Act for leaking sensitive US government documents. Assange pled guilty, conceding he did violate the Espionage Act, but maintains the law is contradictory to the First Amendment, which he claims he should be protected under as a journalist.
Mark Rutte will be the next leader of the North Atlantic Council, or NATO, the security alliance announced this week. A major task for the former Dutch Prime Minister will be orchestrating NATO's ongoing response to the war in Ukraine. William Denzelo reports from Brussels, where the council is headquartered.
NATO's current Secretary-General says the organisation is in good hands. In a social media post, Jens Stoltenberg added that Mark Rutte is a strong leader and a consensus builder. Rutte served as Dutch Prime Minister 4 times, spanning nearly 14 years. Providing ongoing support for Ukraine will be a top priority when Rutte takes over the post in October. Analysts say the job could be complicated further if Donald Trump wins the US presidency in November. Trump has disparaged the alliance, accusing fellow members of not pulling their weight.
8 crew members who were on the ship that struck a bridge in the US city of Baltimore are finally back in India after 3 months on the vessel. Officials say all, barring one of the original crew, are Indian nationals. Shroshi Mukherjee reports from New Delhi.
The crew members of the Dali ship were not permitted to leave as they were considered witnesses to the accident and didn't have proper documentation to enter the US. But after 3 months, a spokesperson from the ship's company, Synergy Marine, said that 8 crew members have already returned home and 2 more would also leave the United States soon. The men who are back home now will still need to be available for court hearings and depositions, as this accident is still being investigated by the US Coast Guard and the FBI. Shreyoshi Mukherjee, New Delhi.
Jailed U.S. journalist Evan Gershkovich appeared in a Russian court on Wednesday. He stands accused of alleged espionage during a reporting trip in March 2023. Gershkovich's legal team denies all allegations. The White House calls the charges ridiculous and his detention totally illegal. In Moscow, Daria Bundarchuk reports.
Evan Gershkovich appeared standing in a glass box in a courtroom in the city of Yekaterinburg on Wednesday. Media members were allowed to film him only for a few minutes. Then journalists were requested to leave the courtroom as the trial is being held behind closed doors, a common practice in Russia for hearing espionage cases. He faces up to 20 years in prison for alleged spying in a Russian defense enterprise in March 2023. The Wall Street Journal dismissed allegations against Gershkovich as false and baseless charges built on calculated and transparent lies. Russia's President Putin earlier admitted there had been contact with Washington about a potential prisoner swap and stressed that such discussions should be held away from the media attention. Daria Bondarchuk, Moscow.
From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
It's the Onion Radio News. JCPenney abandons its 45-second sale. This is Doyle Redland reporting. Word came today from JCPenney headquarters in Plano, Texas, that the retail giant will discontinue its 45-second sale. The bargain bonanza, in which all JCPenney merchandise is discounted by 60% for 45 seconds starting at 1 p.m. daily, simply wasn't pulling in enough revenue. CEO Alan Questrom.
The 45-second sale drew very strong customer response, but regrettably, only a handful of shoppers actually got to capitalize on our fantastic prices due to the horrific injuries they sustained during their stampede to the cashier.
Questrom added that plans are in the works to create a longer 2-minute sale intended to give frantic shoppers at least a fighting chance to enjoy incredible store-wide savings. Doyle Redland for the Onion Radio News, online at theonion.com.
This is the Onion News Network.
We're still not sure why you'd want to watch, but our video feed is streaming nightly for free at cam.freetalklive.com. Free Talk Live.
Talk Live, it's talk radio that you control, and 603-283-6160 is the phone number. We've had some really good calls tonight. That's 603-283-6160, and I'd like to thank Ken Doyle, who is a platinum level amplifier with us here at Free Talk Live. That means that Ken Doyle is giving us $25 at least to a month for the AMPS program. That's amps.freetalklive.com, where you can go to learn more about the AMPS program. Thank you so much to Ken Doyle, and if you would like to join him in supporting the show, helping to advertise, market, promote, and support the show, you can go to amps.freetalklive.com. Thank you to all of our amplifiers, and to Ken Doyle. And with you in the studio tonight, you've got me, Bonnie,
Riley,
and Peakless Mountaineer.
And I'm going to go to the phones. We have David in New Mexico. We were talking about you earlier, David. What's on your mind?
I heard that, Bonnie.
Oh, I'm not sure. I wasn't sure if you were listening.
Yeah.
So you're still moving?
I'm just watching what? Yeah, I'm moving. And ironically, coincidentally, it's pretty funny, man. I was just about to pick up the phone and dial you, and all of a sudden a truckload of Mexicans rolled in on that other illegals property, the one where she dumped that $7,000 shed that she's going to live in, the one you buy along the highway, 10 feet wide, 20 feet long, and you pay for it by the month, and then if you miss your payment, they just come and hook onto it, drag it back home, throw your furniture out of it. Anyway, she dumped one of those there. Now I see about 3 Mexicans and a semi-truck and a pickup truck. They just dumped a trashy, ratty old, about as ratty as a single-wide trailer as you've ever seen, that anybody would want. I presume that she got it for free off of Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace and just had to pay some of her Mexican friends to haul it down here on a Saturday. And And man, that thing is ratty. It's got the only window on this side. It's like 60 feet long. There's only one window, and it ain't got no glass in it. It's just bashed out. And then it's got one door there. It's wide open. And it's pouring down rain now. It's storming. It's funny to watch these Mexicans run around.
How do you know they're Mexicans? David.
Rain is coming down in sheets, and these Mexicans are running around
David.
trying to get this thing unhooked.
David.
And now they're opening the hood on the semi-tractor. Something must be wrong with it. I don't know.
David.
Anyway,
good. We
it's
can
a
make this
circus,
conversation.
man. Of course,
right?
They got a brand new F1. They got a brand new F-150, so that makes it all
I
better.
don't think this is David from New Mexico. I think we have an AI.
What do you mean
got a problem.
AI?
You are. You are responding to what I'm saying, like a conversation. Great.
I wasn't done with my narration on the Mexicans running around.
Yeah. Narration is not what this show is about, David. This show is about conversation.
It's real noisy here. I can't really hear. You probably heard me tell you the rain is coming down in sheets and the lightning is flashing.
I thought I was going to say the Mexicans are
And you
loud.
got these Mexicans running all over everywhere.
How do you know they're Mexicans?
Well, because they're Mexicans, everybody knows what a Mexican looks like.
No. I know what a mestizo looks like, if that's what you're talking about. But you've got mestizos from El Salvador. You've got mestizos from Brazil.
You're right there. By the looks of them, they could be from El Salvador.
They could be Bolivares. I don't know.
Well, no, they just had a coup there, and they ain't letting nobody out of the country.
Well, that doesn't mean it. That doesn't mean it works.
That doesn't mean that Bolivares aren't here already.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that might as well be. I mean, you got the Venezuelans killing little 12-year-old girls after they rape them down there in Texas.
I just want you to know that Mexican is a nationality, not a race.
Yeah.
I don't care. They're Mexicans, man. When you see them out in the beans pulling weeds, they're Mexicans. When you see them hauling ratty old trailers, they're
Mexicans.
Man.
Racist.
Well, it's not difficult.
Yeah, racist and bad at being racist.
Huh?
Man, I wish you could just at least give me some precision with your really bad ideas.
At least my name isn't Turd.
Oh, man.
Well, you've got that going for you.
Yeah.
And that is about it.
And I know a Mexican when I see one.
It's just like porn. You know it when you see it.
They really ought to hire him to be on the Mexican side of the border, because he can just look at a person and know what their nationality is. It's an amazing talent.
I actually can. I can tell you whether I was sleeping in my truck in Albuquerque one night in the war zone by Sarah, where Sarah hangs out, the literal war zone. I was sleeping in the back of my truck.
Is there a war going on in Albuquerque that we don't know about?
Yeah, in the war zone. Ask Sarah when she calls next time. And anyway, there's many stories I could tell you. I'll tell you this one. So I'm laying in the back of the truck, and it's like it's middle of the night. It's like 2 a.m., 4 a.m., whatever. I didn't bother to look at the clock because this stuff happens too often. All of a sudden, I hear a vehicle pull up alongside my truck, and then I hear another one come in behind it, and then I hear, and I go, them's ain't Mexicans, them's Guatemalans. And they're dumping a stolen vehicle behind my vehicle. And sure enough, it was a stolen vehicle, and they had ripped out all the valuable radio out of it, And then the next morning, as I was about to get out of bed, the cop comes and opens the back of my truck. And I go, why are you opening my truck? And he goes, well, do you know there's a stolen vehicle behind you? And I go, oh, yeah, that's what that was all about. And those were Guatemalans and not Mexicans. And I can tell the difference. And I told the cop that, and if you don't believe me, you can read the police report yourself. But I told the cop, no, they probably ain't Mexicans, they're probably Guatemalans.
I definitely believe that you told the cop that. I do not, on the other hand, believe that you can tell the difference between a Mexican and a Guatemalan.
I know my Central Americans, I know my South Americans. I can identify them on spot.
Really? So what about like the Americans that moved to Mexico and actually changed their citizenship? Can you tell by looking at them before and after they've surrendered their passport?
And if they say a single word, I can for sure tell.
Wow.
I mean,
what an astonishing talent I don't believe you have.
So much more talented.
I guess
talent.
being closer to the South America, you might be able to get that talent. I don't think it's impossible, because it's like certain people are, especially when they're talking, they're going to have different voices. I don't think it's the most important part of this.
I don't know. The anarchists that went to Acapulco still sound American to me.
But they're still American.
No. The ones that actually moved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but
I mean, like Jesse Ventura, for example. I cannot tell you at what point in his life he became a Mexican, but he is now a Mexican, and he used to be an American.
They're
And I
just gonna
could
get
not
called
tell
white people.
from the way he speaks when that happened.
Don't be bad mouthing my Jesse, man. He grew up in the same hood as I did.
They're just going to be called white people that speak Spanish.
Perish the thought. I'm not bad-mouthing him. I have an immense amount of respect for that man. Anyone who upsets the CIA that much, has something going for him.
Of course.
Yeah, well, good, because he'll show up at your door and go all Navy SEAL on your ass.
So is this lot where they're putting this big, like really gross trailer, is it the same as the people who have the loud generator?
No. That's the good news. Is the black folk out of San Bernardino County, California, with the loud generator and the 10 dogs all tied on 6-foot leashes that never get any attention whatsoever, never get petted, nothing. They live on the other side of the radio Mexican trailer, so that'll buffer the sound a little bit. So maybe we should
dump
get
him.
some whole bunch
No,
of
he said
radio.
buffer the sound.
Buffer. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got to get a whole bunch of Mexican trailers and put up a wall there so I can't hear the black folk.
Thought he was saying it would FCC with the sound. It's like, wait a second.
Yeah, I see.
Because he's usually awesome at that.
It's a Mexican wall building itself.
Like, I don't think we've ever had to dump him for cussing, have we?
No.
I don't think I have.
Which is pretty impressive given how often he's been on the show.
That's really impressive.
Do you think you ever got dumped, David?
I thought I was dumped. I'm not dumped?
Nope.
No.
No. Bonnie heard you correctly and said, no, it was buffer the sound.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. No, I only one time in my entire 30-year career of calling, bothering you people on the radio on 20 different stations in 20 different states, have I ever been dumped or accurately for a word. And that's because I thought the word that is signified by the letters BS, I thought that was legal to say on air because it had bull in front of it, and I was incorrect, and they dumped me. But I didn't slip up. I thought it was legal.
Was that Free Talk Live?
No. That was KKK, KKKOB in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Okay.
Well, you don't like KKOB, do you?
Well, I feel like we have a lot of important stuff to talk about, and David's call was entertaining, but not very substantive. He's still moving, but maybe his...
Now, is he moving to somewhere in New Mexico?
He said he's going seasteading. Do you want to ask him about it?
Yeah, that's actually interesting.
Peakless wants to ask you about your seasteading, what you're going to do when you move, David.
Ask away, Peakless.
Yeah, so apparently you're not only moving out of New Mexico, which is a relief, honestly, but also you're seasteading?
Absolutely.
Well, tell me about it.
Well, it's not really seasteading because it's not like cool, like having a bobber-shaped house. I'm getting an actual sailboat.
And you're just going to live on your sailboat
but
out
not
at
the
sea?
Gulf of Mexico, right?
Oh, Mexico. I forgot about that part. I'll have to move again.
But what part of the sea? Because recently we talked to somebody from... Oh, man, I wish I could remember what it's called. Oh, something Haven. Freedom Havens, I think. At Porkfest, me and Aria talked to this guy on the show. And I suddenly can't remember what it's called. It's called...
Liberty Haven, maybe?
Yeah, maybe Liberty Haven.
Yeah, I think so.
And he's really interesting, and he said that you got to be really far out there to actually be in international waters.
Yeah, it's like 200 kilometers, was it?
Oh, that's a ways. Wow.
What was it?
200 miles.
200 miles.
It's pretty far out. Is that what you're going to do?
David?
There? Hello?
Oh, yeah, I heard you.
Yeah, we lost you there for a second.
Yeah, I heard that.
Oh, I'm just wondering, is that how far out you're going to go? 200 miles or 100 miles?
Well, when I sail across over to the French Riviera to pick up on the French ladies, then yeah, I'll be beyond 200 miles from the U.S. and every other country.
Sounds like a fun time. When is this happening?
What's happening right now? I'm in the process of transferring money to buy the boat and getting insurance and paying the marina where the boat is slipped right now.
So you're giving up on your horse dream right now, but you're going all in.
No. I'm gonna make lots of money, Miss Bonnie, and I'm gonna buy the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Nina, and I'm gonna put the horses in the sailboats, and then I'm gonna hire me some guy named Columbus to help me sail, because I can't sail 3 boats at one time.
So you're going to ride your pony on your boat. Okay.
Yeah.
And just like the song says.
That's why I'm getting 3 boats. I'm going to have, 20, 30 horses probably.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. I don't know if I believe you at this point. Are you even really seasteading?
Does sound pretty spurious at this point.
Yes, I am seasteading, only not in a cool bobber-shaped house in a traditional sailboat, Miss Bonnie.
Okay. Well,
All right.
I wish you good luck
Good
on
luck,
that.
David.
And I especially hope that you are treated better by whatever courts that you interact with in whatever place you're moving to.
Indeed.
Yep, and hopefully you won't have any neighbors, 'cause that's the only way David will be happy. Thank you for the call, David. So this whole show has been kind of dedicated to this whole idea, this whole recent phenomenon. The U.S. Supreme Court dismissed or got rid of this decision. I don't remember all of a sudden what you call it when they get rid of it. They ended it. Okay, they ended the precedent of the Chevron deference. The Chevron deference basically said regulatory federal agencies can come up with a definition of things in law when it's too ambiguous in law, as long as it's,
if it's legal to interpret it that way
and reasonable,
and Congress didn't tell you to interpret it in a particular way, then up until yesterday, they could just interpret it any which way they felt like, and specifically could change that interpretation willy-nilly.
And now the judges actually have to do what their job is, to interpret these things.
Instead of letting the bureaucrats in D.C. or the state bureaucrats or wherever do the dirty work.
It's mostly obvious how bad the Chevron deference was when you look at a case that exactly like Chevron versus Natural Resources Defense Council, where the defendant is the person, the person on the side of the regulatory agency, because it's like, no, we can do this because we said so, because we are defining this as that. Like the EPA on the side of the, they're definitely in the pockets of Chevron, decided something for the courts in something where there's trying to determine if Chevron's doing something right or wrong. That's absolutely crazy.
Like if I get sued for something and the judge sides with me, I don't usually get special cool new legal powers because of that.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're a government agency and you get sued, then the judge can, in fact, not only give you special cool new powers, but absolutely every other government agency. So, yeah, it's kind of astonishing that it's lasted this long, frankly, that there has no one been able to raise enough of a fuss to the right people in the right way to get this thing overruled. And it is so beautiful that it's been done, because we need to dismantle the deep state, at least in one definition of the thing, the bureaucratic state that is completely inaccessible to the people that it is ruling over needs to have some of its power reduced. And this goes a very long way in that direction.
So we were reading this article from someone with the opinion that this is a bad thing. And this is from nrdc.org. The next thing they had to say was, the decision has profound consequences, not only for the country's rule of law, that's ridiculous, but also for how agencies such as those protecting the public against everything from pollution, which is exactly what they did not do in the Chevron case.
Doing a real bang-up job of protecting us against pollution, aren't ya?
Yep.
Yeah, the EPA pollutes rivers and lets the EPA get away with it. It's the way government works. They guard the hen house just like foxes do.
Yeah, remember that oil that that oil rig that blew up in the Gulf of Mexico. Yeah, and as far as I know, still pouring oil into the ocean to this day. Oh, and why is that? Oh, right, because the EPA sucks at its job. They were supposed to regulate this, but they don't have anywhere near the resources to regulate this. You know, wouldn't it be nice if this was regulated by competition? Where if your company screws up so horrendously that you have put a permanent piece of pollution in the world, that you lose enough market share because you have enough competition that nobody wants to buy from you anymore. Because we actually have more than a handful of oil companies. Wouldn't that be nice?
Oh, it'd be so nice, because then we'd have more competition. Then we'd have more options of oil companies that aren't into polluting the river and getting away with it.
It gives someone an incentive to not pollute the river. Otherwise, you just have, well, we make the rules and we are the industry. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and it's always this thing of like, well, we're not going to do what we're supposed to do, but we will probably only be fined this amount. So as long as we're making more than that amount by not doing this at any of our locations, then we'll just continue to do these insanely risky things. Very much like the banking industry.
Now, I will say that if the free market were able to be, responsible in a way that it could control the environment in such a way that pollution wouldn't happen, people would be investing in solutions like finding mushrooms or certain things to clean up oil spills rather than blaming the government and demanding the government do something about it.
Right.
And then they just, bail out companies that have done things wrong the whole time instead of letting the market let the company die.
Right.
So he says this decision has profound consequences not only for the country's rule of law, but also for how agencies such as those protecting the public against everything from pollution and contaminated food to workplace hazards and rising drug prices are able to function.
It's like this guy has never heard of regulatory capture, just isn't aware that that's a thing where, because look, I get it. The corporations are doing terrible, terrible things, and they're completely protected, and that needs to stop. This just isn't the way to do it.
So what exactly is regulatory capture?
So regulatory capture is where you are so influential on the regulatory body that you have basically determined how they will regulate you. And very frequently what happens in these cases is that, the polluters and the people who are putting terrible things into food and all of that will get so good at this, they will literally write the laws that will then get passed to be regulated on them. And why would they do that? Oh, to keep out competition.
And to not have to ever stop doing things the way that they think makes them the most money, whether it's polluting the world or not.
And that's exactly it. All of this regulation, that is its ultimate effect, is to keep the entrenched powers entrenched, to make sure that there's no one who can compete with Tyson Food or Chevron Oil Company, to make sure that no competition can simply come in and just do the job well.
Is that why there are only 3 major cell phone manufacturers or cell phone companies like Google, Apple, and...
That's exactly it.
Wow.
That's why there are so few of absolutely everything. So few cell phone manufacturers, so few internet service providers, so few banks, so few oil companies, so few food creation companies. All of these terribly necessary things. But because they are so heavily regulated, and don't even get me started on the medical industry, but because all of these things are so heavily regulated, no one can simply come in and do a better job.
Yeah, it's probably just too expensive to even start. Like all the things you have to do to start a business are, prohibitive. And then on top of that, having to do things the way that they set, the other people in the game have set the rules for the newcomers into the game.
Exactly right.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and if you just create a mountain of legislation so that unless you have an army of lawyers, you can't even expect to last a year, let alone turn a profit, let alone get a reasonable part of market share, then here we are.
And I don't understand why a leftist would think that overturning Chevron would be anything but a good thing for all of these reasons. We are right now going off against corporations, not even just the government. We're talking about how they have how corporations have their hands in the lawmaking, and this overturning of Chevron just took a little bit of that ability away from them, and it's nothing but a thing to be happy about. So 603-283-6160, getting more into either disingenuousness or lies from this author. 603-283-6160. You can call with whatever is on your mind. It's Free Talk Live.
Free Talk Live.
What's the difference between a stoplight and a school bus?
A stoplight is a light, and a school bus is a school bus.
Full of children.
Right. So
That's a good
The light
lad.
doesn't have any kids in it.
That's what you call a derelict, educated derelict.
yeah,
You gotta come out of Harvard.
I'm really not a derelict. I work for a
You
living.
are an educated derelict. Well, you
Barbara,
know what?
I agree with
Have
you.
fun, play your games.
No.
You're a
Because I'll tell you
fornicator,
what,
Mark.
When
Barbara.
you pass that next red light, I sure hope they get you good. Now,
Barbara,
hope you don't kill anybody.
I'm agreeing with you.
Oh, she hung up on you, Mark.
But I agree with you, Barbara. I was telling you that I agree with you, except for the stoplight thing.
Children, Mark, there's children around at every red light. You could possibly kill someone.
This, by the way, gentlemen.
If you would run a red light at 3 a.m. when there's no traffic as far as the eye can see, then you would just as soon run over a school bus and kill all the kids inside.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern at freetalklive.com.
From Feature Story News in New York, I'm Sally Patterson with a look back at some of the week's top stories.
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
US President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump went head-to-head in a fiery presidential debate, televised on Thursday. Hosted in the US city of Atlanta by CNN, this was the first debate of the year between the two presumptive nominees, who are vying to return to the White House in November's election. The pair clashed over immigration, foreign policy and abortion, though the age of both candidates was also in the spotlight.
I spent half my career being criticized as being the youngest person in politics. I was the second youngest person ever elected to the United States Senate, and now I'm the oldest. This guy's 3 years younger and a lot less competent. I think that just look at the record. Look at what I've done. Look how I've turned around the horrible situation he left me.
Well, I took 2 tests, cognitive tests. I aced them. We made it public. He took none. I'd like to see him take one, just one, a real easy one. Like go through the first 5 questions. He couldn't do it.
There was no audience and microphones were muted when it wasn't the candidate's time to speak. Both Democrats and Republicans are acknowledging it was a troublesome debate for the current president, who spoke with a hoarse voice and often stumbled. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange landed back in his native Australia this week after striking a plea deal with US prosecutors. His wife Stella told media he needed time to recover and to get used to freedom after a 14-year legal battle with US officials who accused him of leaking classified documents. Chris Gilbert reports.
After spending 1,900 days in Belmarsh prison in the UK and years in exile in London's Ecuadorian embassy, a US judge has ruled that his time already served fulfills a sentence for breaking the Espionage Act for leaking sensitive US government documents. Assange pled guilty, conceding he did violate the Espionage Act, but maintains the law is contradictory to the First Amendment, which he claims he should be protected under as a journalist.
Mark Rutte will be the next leader of the North Atlantic Council, or NATO, the security alliance announced this week. A major task for the former Dutch Prime Minister will be orchestrating NATO's ongoing response to the war in Ukraine. William Denzelo reports from Brussels, where the council is headquartered.
NATO's current Secretary-General says the organisation is in good hands. Rutte served as Dutch Prime Minister 4 times, spanning nearly 14 years. Providing ongoing support for Ukraine will be a top priority when Rutte takes over the post in October. Analysts say the job could be complicated further if Donald Trump wins the US presidency in November. Trump has disparaged the alliance, accusing fellow members of not pulling their weight.
That's your roundup of news making headlines this week. Sally Patterson reporting.
You can help spread the ideas of liberty with our Patreon for just $5 per month at amps.freetalklive.com.
that you control. That means you can call 603-283-6160. That's 603-283-6160. And we now have this thing called the Free Talk Live podcast. We've been podcasting since podcasts began, but we're launching a new podcast anyway. Our new podcast is 30 to 45 minutes long and releasing once a week. You can find it at freetalkcast.com. It's brought by to you by the same people that bring you Free Talk Live, and we'd love for you to check it out. Again, that's freetalkcast.com. And with you on Free Talk Live tonight, you've got me, Bonnie.
Riley.
And Peakless Mountaineer.
And so I skipped ahead a little bit in this article we've been reading. It's I keep calling him a leftist. I guess I don't really know that, but a pro-government guy. Somebody who's the decision of the Supreme Court yesterday to overrule the Chevron deference. And he's talking about why this is such a bad thing that this happened. And we disagree, so I wanted to get into an article with the other side's opinion so we can talk about why they're wrong. So he says, as society, technology, and the economy have grown more complex, so too has the task of governance. Because Congress is not equipped to micromanage the day-to-day administration of the legislation that it passes, it must rely on federal agencies under the supervision of the president to carry out laws and policies according to their best good faith interpretations. It's ridiculous.
So does he think that this decision overruling Chevron deferment, does he think that this wipes away all of the bureaucratic state, that there's just not going to be government agencies anymore?
But remember,
I should be so lucky.
Yeah.
Remember, the bureaucratic state is what got us into the mess with Obamacare.
Right?
I just don't think that it is logical, or it's so uninformed to think that these bureaucrats, these federal agencies, just come to their best good faith interpretation of these laws, and that's all this is. There's no other incentives going on.
Right?
It's crazy.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is that halo, right? It's not a company, one of those greedy corporations just trying to get money. No, the people that go into this only do it for good. They only want to serve the people. They don't have selfish individual human desires.
Of course
they're
not.
agents.
They're perfect. They're perfect little angels.
They're perfect angels.
That's why they joined the government, to just give of themselves and help humanity.
Exactly.
That's the story they want to tell us.
Devoted to pure virtue, and when you do, you get a government job. And as soon as you have a government job, you become an angel.
It says, likewise, federal judges have a role in determining the meaning of Congress's laws in order to settle disputes, but the act of policymaking has always belonged to the two elected branches. Well, one thing about this is he's acting like, we'll get into it in a second. He says, today, however, the Supreme Court seized for both itself and lower court judges a policy-making role that the Constitution did not intend for them to have. But he's acting like the Constitution intended for the EPA and all this stuff that didn't come around until the 70s. That's just not the case either. If anything, the Constitution would have been more, it most closely aligns to the judges making these decisions, not something that didn't even exist for 200 years.
Yeah, the existence of the judge's station is actually in the Constitution.
Yeah.
Whereas the existence of all of these agencies is not in there. And if anything, there's some pretty strong language in there about how these shouldn't exist.
I Googled it. We can thank Nixon for the EPA in 1970.
Yep.
I didn't look up every single one or anything, but they weren't there during the writing of the Constitution. There isn't some kind of amendment that created them either. It's just the president's creating these things.
Yeah, the president is creating them because obviously he wants more power and more people doing his bidding.
And just like he was elected in order to give some people, some lobbyists, more power that they wanted, some people that worked in, whatever agency.
Yeah, it is astonishing to hear the argument that it is unconstitutional to have the judges interpret the laws. Well, That's their whole job.
Yeah.
That is literally the entire job.
Well, he said that they have a role.
Oh, it's a role. Really? Because according to the Chevron deferment, they do not have a role in determining these definitions. And they don't even have a role in making sure that the same definition is true on day 1 versus day 2, or day 2 versus day 3. No, as far as the Chevron deferment thing goes, you can just change it every day if you feel like it. Whereas that's not how to have a stable society.
It says the court stripped many federal agencies tasked with protecting public health, public safety, and the environment, including the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, just to name 2, of their powers to interpret the laws they carry out. Instead, federal judges now get to call the shots. And what's terrible about this also is cops are part of the government who break due process all the time by just going out there and punishing people for things and not doing their part to just, bring someone to trial. And that people like the Food and Drug Administration do the same thing. They're unelected, created out of thin air bureaucrats, and they'll go to the Amish and be like, hey, we don't like you selling raw milk. You're coming with us. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
They're just another unconstitutional group that, like he said, that the laws they carry out, that's not constitutional. That's not how due process is supposed to work. What the heck?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely absurd that the federal government even has a constitutional role in regulating activity that is not interstate. Like, when it's from one person in, say, New Hampshire to another person in New Hampshire, they should not have any role in that whatsoever. But, well, clearly the judges have decided that they get to determine what is and isn't constitutional, which, by the way, is a power that is unconstitutional, and also that everything is constitutional as far as powers of the federal government go.
Well, of course it is. They want to interpret it the way they want to interpret the Constitution the way they want to get that power and maintain that power. Otherwise, if it's seen that they are not following the Constitution, what essentially is going to happen is it's going to create distrust among the people. And we can't have the people distrusting our system now, can we?
Well, this next part of the article gets into the case that overruled the Chevron deference. I know you've been sitting there reading about it, Peebles Mountaineer.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Loper Bright Enterprises, which was a family-owned fishery, versus Raymundo. It says, Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raymundo pitted the owners of a New England fishing company against a federal agency, the National Marine Fisheries Services. And that's another thing. It's like, it's a federal agency. At first, they got ruled with because they're the ones that make the rule.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and apparently there was also another case that had to be tacked on to this because Ketanji Brown Jackson made the original judgment, so she had to recuse herself from this very important case. So that is why they had to tack on an additional case that she wasn't a judge for, so that she could be part of this very important decision.
And she still ruled incorrectly, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that was Relentless Incorporated versus Department of Commerce, which, again, it's suing the government because it did not have the right to put these expenses on these companies.
And let me guess, the judge sided with the government because of the government's interpretation of the federal agency's interpretation of the rules being used on them.
That is exactly what happened in the case that they brought to the Supreme Court. And it is really surprising that the Supreme Court actually saw this, because usually they kind of shy away from anything important. But here is this incredibly important thing that they actually went, oh, no, that was a bad idea.
It's really surprising, some of the stuff that happens, just a lot of the time I think everything is staged against us, and then sometimes I think that there are some good people that try to fix things, they don't do everything correct and they're not angels, and it's just it's really confusing to the brain.
Yeah, it's weird winning. As a libertarian, I am accustomed to two things. Number one, being correct, and number two, losing.
Yeah.
And here we are,
being
correct.
Oh yeah, being correct is such a lonely road, though.
And winning?
It's weird because
That's so weird.
Earlier in the year, Trump went to the Libertarian National Convention and tried to get the approval of us, and then Julian Assange was released, and now the Chevron deference has been overruled.
Yeah, and I think that I mean, this might be a little bit tinfoil hatty, but I think that it's a big club and they do talk to each other, and that the judge that allowed him to accept a plea deal was very much influenced by the current administration. So I think that basically what happened was that Biden saw a lot of people supporting Donald Trump because of his promise to free Ross, and he needed to have something, and maybe not him so much as the people around him, really. Right. But, the Biden camp saw that the competition had this free Ross thing going, and they're like, well, we got to put some kind of feather in our cap.
We got to give them Julian Assange.
Right. Well, and not quite.
Yeah,
not
right.
quite, because he absolutely, 1 second before this had happened, he could have just said, you're free to go.
Yeah. Exactly. He had to instead let it happen through a plea deal where he had to plead to things that that he shouldn't have had to, but it's the smartest thing to do to become free.
And there were some WikiLeaks documents regarding the Democrats.
Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, after years of being tortured, I can't really say that I blame Assange for taking this.
Right.
I'm still blown away at the fact that, you're in another country and from another country and have never been to our country, but
we're going to take everything away from you anyway because it's what we do.
We've just decided that everyone on Earth that we can get our grubby little mitts on has to obey our laws.
Yeah.
And if you don't, and you ever go to a country where we can convince them to kidnap you and hand you over to us, well, don't mess with our military-industrial complex or else.
Yeah.
And it's like with the Roger Ver case, he paid to leave and just was like, please let me not be associated with you anymore. And then 10 years later, I think it was, they can just come around and tell a country, hey, arrest him for us. And they'll do it because they say, now we decided, only now did we realize you didn't pay us enough.
Yeah. Well, and, I still suspect that part of that is to just make sure that all of the people in the big block camp and all the people in the small block camp still hate each other.
The Bitcoin.
Heaven forbid that we remember that we're actually fighting a very powerful enemy that is against us both.
Well,
and that we could maybe stop accusing each other of being corporate government shills trying to destroy the thing that will take them down, and work together to improve the thing that will actually take the monstrous empire down.
I just think that there really are some people that are like, no, I am not working against the federal government. Please tell me the way to work with you, and then I will, because that's what a lot of the exchanges do.
The cryptocurrency exchanges, they want to work with the government. They don't want to be taken out by the government. They want to be the government's favorite entity to work with.
Doesn't always work out with them, and I don't know how they haven't noticed that.
Yeah, they keep getting beaten up over that decision.
But sometimes they just get fined, whereas Ian Freeman gets 8 years in prison. So.
Well, and honestly, it is just so naive to think that you can be on the side of government while you actively undermine their biggest power. Their biggest power is very simply to print money. Don't get me wrong. It is very important to them especially that they have all of these other powers, like a monopoly on the court system, for example, and, being able to regulate everything on Earth all of the time. But they can't afford to do any of that unless they can print money. I mean, the expansion of government power can only happen with enforcement. And the expansion of enforcement can only happen when you print the money.
Well, I kind of think that they have realized that, but they think the only thing they can do is their little magical tricks of manipulation and making things look a certain way. So scaring people out of using Bitcoin the way it's supposed to be used, one. And then two, coming out with a CBDC and acting like it's the same exact thing. You don't even need this cryptocurrency. You can do the same thing with us. And I don't know I don't know for sure that's what they're going to do, but it seems pretty likely.
Yeah, that is the thing that's really on the table right now, is they do not have public acceptance of a central bank digital currency. They've implemented it here and there, but like globally, because that's what they need for utter control of all human destiny, is they need a full global cooperation in central bank digital currency. And they're just not there yet. And here's this thing, this uncensorable, uncontrollable, undefraudable version, and they need to stop that and slow it down and get their eternal control grid up before it gets completely destroyed.
Right, but first they got to look like they're, getting in bed with the Bitcoin people first by selling portions of Bitcoin or appearing to. And that's what the ETF is all about, in my opinion.
Well, I think this is one of the weird things, is that ultimately our enemy is not a monolith.
Right.
There are factions in the authoritarian camp.
Oh, yeah.
Like, for example, the fascists are not the same as the communists. And, to us, it's just a bunch of authoritarians, but to them, that's a question of which tribe gets to rule the world. So right now, they're realizing that, hey, once we get central bank digital currencies out, that's the end. Whoever is in control of this thing is in control of the world forever. So now they are fighting a war between themselves over who gets those keys. And with any luck, they will be so focused on each other that we can manage to develop something useful out of cryptocurrency that ordinary people can use.
Another reason that I think that we are weirdly winning this year, the libertarian-minded among us, is just that libertarians have shown that they are big enough of a group, and I don't even mean of a federally voting. I don't even mean that, but I guess a little bit that way. They got, like 2% at the most or something at one point. But I mostly mean people moving to the Free State Project. They're weirdly watching us, and me and other Free Stater friends have been talking about this. Like, it's been weird little things going on for over a year now, like RFK coming to Pork Fest, Tulsi Gabbard coming to Liberty Forum. And we're like, do you think that they're finally starting to watch us? I mean, they've always been watching us. Like, the feds have been watching the Free State Project since it was like 100 people up here. Mm-hmm. And now it is a really big thing.
And they want to infiltrate the movement even more because they want to get spies.
But I think that at some point they have to kind of act like they are with us, because if they just like go and bomb New Hampshire, that looks really bad for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to pretend that you're fighting for freedom when the people who are actually fighting for freedom are against you.
What do you mean?
So that's what we want. Mm-hmm. We want freedom.
Yeah.
We're very clear about that. It's right in the name, liberty, libertarian. Right. And when you are against the libertarians, it is kind of hard to pretend that you're still defending liberty.
I totally agree. And one time, like 2 or 3 years ago, I was saying this to Ian, I was saying, during all the COVID stuff, they really go after the word freedom. And I think I see their in for that is in what you just want to be free to do whatever you want. But they don't really go after the word liberty. They act like it doesn't exist. They don't talk much about like these people not wearing masks. All they care about is their liberty. Why? Because if you like hear that word, you're gonna have to go look up the definition, and then you're like, oh, this isn't bad at all. But
also it's part of the religion. Mm-hmm. The Liberty Bell.
Yeah,
that too. The Sons of Liberty. Mm-hmm. So it's like
America is all about liberty. Right. You have the liberty to be forced into a mask.
Right. So they can't be seen coming down on liberty. They can't be seen trying to stamp out liberty.
Yeah.
Because that's part of it'd be like the Roman Catholic Church trying to stamp out salvation. Like they can't be seen doing that, or people will go, well, wait a second.
I thought Jesus was all about salvation.
Right. So they can't be like, we will fight repentance everywhere we find it. No, they can't do that because that's part of what they sell you on.
Oh yeah, they want to sell themselves as the one true path to salvation.
Right. And in the same way, the American government especially can't be out stamping out all of the liberty, because that was the very faith that they sold us when we were in their indoctrination camps for over a decade.
The Statue of Liberty. That's what America is.
Right, exactly. The Statue of Liberty.
Give me you're tired, you're poor, things like that. It's the myth. The myth of America.
Right. I mean, that is the goddess of this country, is the Statue of Liberty, so they can't be, fighting their own faith, or else, well, it shows people who they really are a little bit too easily.
And I just think that things have gotten weirdly and quickly mainstream, and maybe even LPNH, Libertarian Party of New Hampshire's Twitter is like part of why this is happening, because like the other day, like I'm kind of in two different Twitter worlds where like I talk about libertarian stuff, but I also talk about like Lady Gaga, and like I'll see a post about something and I'll comment on it, and sometimes it has nothing to do with libertarianism, it has to do with Lady Gaga or some other pop star or something. And the other day, like I made basically like people in the Katy Perry camp would agree with what I said, but people in the Kesha, who is another pop star camp, would disagree with what I said really hard. And I said something on a comment that was just like pop star related, like that, and somebody said like you're wrong or whatever, and then they replied, "Holy crap, you're one of those racist libertarians from New Hampshire, lady." And I was like, whoa, how does somebody know what this is? I mean, it's not that they know what it is, as in it's not racist. That's just the word people use to put down people's ideas that they don't understand.
Oh yeah,
it's cute. But
racism is a way to do that, because racism is a bad idea to begin with, and so when they call you a racist, you're essentially calling your ideas bad. You're just a bad person for having bad ideas.
I was just shocked.
Yeah, and then they don't have to. Then they don't have to face the ideas.
No.
Sorry, you're saying?
Oh, I was just saying, like, it was just shocking to have someone of a different world bring that up. It's like this.
Yeah, they're starting to fight us.
Yeah.
Usually they laugh at us. Now we have to worry about this.
Or they don't know about us at all. Like most people, like by the time I left San Antonio, like all my gay friends who we only really talked about like pop culture stuff, if I said libertarian, they would have been like, what do you mean librarian? Literally.
Yeah.
And that literally happened to me.
Yeah, we're used to first they ignore you. We're used to, and then they make fun of you. Mm-hmm. And now they're actually starting to, run the propaganda campaign against us. Because it's this very, very simple tactic. Find a thing people hate and make that the label bucket. Mm-hmm. Now, racism,
hate,
white supremacy, white nationalism, any kind of thing that, hate
fascism,
speech, hate this, hate that. Yeah, any horrible thing. For example, on the right, they hate pedophiles.
Oh, yeah.
So everyone's a pedophile.
And mark my words, 20 years from now, when the right is terrible again, they're going to do this. And they're going to do this with pedophile or whatever horrible thing people hate. But you take this thing that people actually hate, and then you take this thing that you have a problem with because it's your enemy, and especially if they're good ideas that you don't ever want anyone thinking about, let alone contending with, and you just put them in the bucket. Mm-hmm. And you just say, oh, libertarians are racists.
Yep.
Now, I don't have to prove to you that they're racists. I don't have to, demonstrate that racism and libertarianism have anything to do with each other, because they don't.
Right.
They are completely 90 degrees from each other.
Indeed.
But I can just dismiss this entire idea as long as people will put up with it.
Yep. And other people who see that, who are very low information, that's now their opinion of this idea that's extremely complex and has nothing to do with, well, now their opinion is that has to do with racism or hate or whatever it is. But it's a super, it's a dumb tactic, as in the person using it doesn't have a lot of intelligence, but it works.
And it's dumb because it stops people talking, which is exactly how the tyrants win. And the way we win is by keep talking to each other.
Exactly. We got to keep communicating, keep the lines open.
Like the lines of Free Talk Live.
Exactly.
You can go to freetalklive.com for more. Thank you for listening and calling in, and peace.
I've been told no in many different ways.
I give you an order and you're going to obey it.
George, you can go this way. You can't do that and you have to leave here.
You cannot bring signs into the rally.
Walk with me. Well, I'm comfortable here, actually. Whoa, hey. Who do you think you are? Excuse me.
There is no video and audio
wilderness.
No, I have work today. This is
you ain't gonna make it.
Wait now. Wait a minute.
Hey! Oh my God! Unbelievable!